right. Hey, welcome everybody. Excited as hell to sit down with the man, the myth, the legend, the former Seco First Sergeant of 275, Command Sergeant Major retired, Jesse Navarro. So Jesse served in the 75th, RSTB, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Battalion. He spent over 20 years in the Ranger Regiment, had a Bronze Star with V, and had a total of 15 deployments. And then this is probably the most important statistic we'll cover. He is also in the distinguished member of the 75th Ranger Regiment and also the second best Charlie Company First Sergeant of 275. I won't say who the first is. He's on the podcast also, but, I'll just throw that out there.
It's always good to be runner-up sometimes.
Hey, if you're not first, you're last. I'm just kidding. Hey, yeah, so he was the first sergeant of Charlie Company before Jesse Endell. So now I took over for Jesse. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there, little jab to get the podcast going. So Clay, let's get started, brother.
All right, thanks, Mike, for that introduction. For Command Sergeant Major retired Jesse Navarro, a very dear friend and Ranger buddy to me. Jesse, it's good to have you on the podcast today. And I'm really looking forward to you being able to share your story, with friends and colleagues of the past, those young Rangers that are going to be listening to this podcast, looking for the history and stories. And I couldn't think of a better Ranger to have on here to share your pilgrimage through the ranks and through our Army. With that being said, I'd like for you to tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then what intrigued you to become an Army Ranger?
Sure. Thanks, Mike and Clay. I think honestly, I was always more of a doer than I guess a academia type person. My sister was the opposite. She was valedictorian of our school, pretty large school as well. I got good grades only because I was afraid of my dad, but nonetheless, I played, football, baseball, wrestling, ran track, and I like the team sport kind of stuff. So obviously, from prior military members on both sides of the family, I always had that in mind, or at least as an option. I was a pretty good wrestler living in Illinois, and I had a couple opportunities for wrestling, but so I was kind of torn. Inside of me, I knew I wasn't probably mature enough yet to go to college and not either mess up a scholarship or waste my parents' money or both. So I made a decision. And honestly, my dad was a diver, underwater welder for a while. So between having an old Navy SEAL that worked for him and or with him, and then family, mostly the Marine Corps, I was leaning towards Department of the Navy. But honestly, I had a what I consider a family member, but really a close family friends. Their son named Eric was an NCO in 2nd Ranger Battalion, and made RD selection, and spent a little bit of time between the two organizations before he got out. So, and the funny thing was, the guy that used to walk him to school was a guy named Joe Meglin, who Joe was a 175 guy. Not a legend there. I think was old RSM Albertson's squad leader. But so it's kind of funny how those influences all, small town in Illinois, all take grasp. But Eric came back, showed me some Ranger videos, some folks helo casting and stuff like that, with some pretty corny music being in the background, and kind of hooked me. So I changed my mind. And plus the Marine recruiter, the Navy recruiter, when I looked into the SEALs, was I asked him, I said, I'm really considering the Marines right now. And he said, well, the only good Marine's a submarine. I said, well, you're out, and never looked back to the Navy. But simple as that. I went to MEPS, and he told me what to say, what to ask for. So he said, you want an Airborne Ranger option 40 contract? Might as well have been in a different language to me, but I sat down with the MEPS recruiter in Chicago and told him that, and he over and over said they didn't have any. Told me I need to be an airborne medic or something else. Called my cousin from a payphone, and basically was like, you don't want to do that. Like, you're going to sit there and watch jumps and support this. And nothing against medics, but that was his lens as a infantry guy, and I didn't know any better. So I said, all right. Then, he said, honestly, man, if they're not going to do it, then I would just join the Marines. I wouldn't go in the big army as an infantry guy. So I got up to shake this Master Sergeant Chapman's hand, which I was calling sir. And I said, thanks for your time. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to walk across the hall and join the Marine Corps. And he said, well, hang on, let me make one more phone call, of course. And that phone call got it done. But I was fortunate to get an opportunity to go through it. I believe the saying that it's harder to stay than it is to get there. So I at least ran faster than some from the cops and all that. But no, it was a great time.
It's funny how many people, have similar stories about, going to the recruiter and, getting denied. But, I think what it is just a sheer force of will of people that make up our formation, that they're not going to take no for an answer. Like they're going to figure it out, shit. I don't remember who it was. Was it Steven Dellinger? Maybe it was Steven Dellinger. I can't remember who it was, but they literally went AWOL. They just got on the bus at airborne school to go down to RAS, because at the time, wherever it was, like you didn't run like most of us fucking did. You got on the bus and went and did that. And then like the 82nd was like calling, looking for him and shit. Like he wasn't there, and they're like, oh yeah, hey, we got him, oh yeah, hey, he's coming to Ranger Regiment. Like,
You'll sign into the unit and they own you.
yeah, right. Yeah. So
Sure.
I think it was Dellinger. I can't remember though. But
Figure
yeah.
out. That's a great interlude in the conversation we're going to have today, Jesse. But I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit because we're great Ranger buddies, and we drank a little brown water and beer and PT together and all this other stuff. And I know you were a great high school athlete, just from hearing some of the stories and stuff. So just Mike, I want to share a little fun fact. So I'm gonna let Jesse tell you who he faced in the high school state championship and got to tackle more than once. There.
Yeah. Awesome. What position did you play, Jesse? I didn't know this.
I came in as a fullback, but when they in my school, there was a lot of surrounding towns that played at my school. So it wasn't so much that our town was so huge. It was just that we were a high school for many towns. So we were 6A school. And my junior year, we had a guy hurt. So I came in to really step up from a JV to a varsity position. So I guess in my sophomore years, that's right. And we had a few guys that end up doing really well and going to the NFL. And so, of course, the first initiation was, hey, we're going to throw which was a 121 waggle, which is a 7-yard short banana pass right in the middle. Of course, I couldn't drop it or let it get intercepted in my first, varsity scrimmage practice. And so I got set up by the quarterback. I got carried off the field when one of the guys that hit me that ended up going to the Cleveland Browns, put his face mask on my back. But nonetheless, so we played for the semifinals. We played a school called East St. Louis, which is in Illinois, but on the border. And then for the state championship, we played a school named Mount Carmel, and they were a Catholic school in Chicago that recruits because they're a Catholic school, so they kind of get away with that. So they have a pretty good track record of folks going to the league. And the year we played the championship, their quarterback was Donovan McNabb.
Oh, no kidding. I actually, you know what? I did remember this actually. Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And honestly, we had some huge players, and frankly, I'm pretty sure quite a few people juicing, but my coach would make jokes, he'd open up the Powerade machines after double practice and say, go in there and cool those steroids, pump it through your veins. Haha. And I'm like, man, this is so wrong. But we had I was mediocre compared to those guys, but when we went out on that field, it looked like some high school kids playing some, NFL players. Every one of them had beards. Every one of them had leg hair, But so we lost that game. We took the second place in the state championship there, and then the schools continued to do pretty well across Illinois, though. Continuously, but yeah, I was a better wrestler than a football player. I love football a lot more. I was like Rudy, not near as small and hopefully worthless, but I had the same heart. So when I got stuck
That's
on
so rude. Rudy was a hero.
I got stuck on the scrum offense, but I would constantly perform, and a lot of the players are like, it's political, because it's who your dad is, and or his not, and so we finally had a fullback get hurt in the game, so I went in and I was a leading rusher, only playing the second half, 212 yards on 10 carries, and so after that I started to get play time, so I loved it. If I could do nothing else, it would have been that. It just, when I dislocated my shoulder in a freestyle tournament wrestling, and my wrestling coach was telling me during football season, I kept dislocating it. And he's like, hey, I don't want to break your heart, but you're a better wrestler than you are a football player. So you got to make a choice, man, one or the other. And I'm strongly advising it's the other. And so I said, all right. So my senior year, I had to step out of football. They had a good year, but I had to prepare for wrestling season. So.
Yeah, those are two sports that definitely, well, timing wise, but also just don't placate off the other one,
Yeah.
Dropping weight and everything. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I will say the people I knew that wrestled, buddy Jimmy Pera was in 375 with me in the same platoon, and he was a wrestler out in California. And I do believe, I tell people this a lot because people get so overwhelmed and freaked out about, what it takes to be an airborne ranger. And I'm like, obviously not talking losses and combat and all that, but like training wise, my easiest day when wrestling was harder than my hardest day in the Rangers. And I believe that. Like I'd cut down from 212 football to 160 to wrestle, and it was a good train up. I obviously very different as far as what's hard. Being cold and miserable, it's just something you can't prep for too much. But besides that, it was a good preparation. I think wrestling's a good preparation for a selection.
I agree. So Jesse, I'd assimilate your story like classic Great American meets the Ranger Regiment. You're from the Midwest United States, you're a wrestler, you're a football player, you're making good grades. So this young scholar athlete, buck 60ish. I don't know what you came in at. If you were heavier, we never talked about that. So you join the Ranger Regiment, you go through basic training, you graduate airborne school, and maybe in your own words, tell us your story, transition through RIP into battalion, and what led from there as a young private through, and just walk us down your timeline, man. We're interested in learning more about Jesse and your Ranger story.
Sure. Yeah. My story is pretty funny as far as like, it's kind of so obvious of what not to do when you're a private and RIP, but I was an idiot. So I went through RIP, try to be the gray guy as much as I could, and because I was a decent athlete going in, there's, I don't know what at the time, but 70-something MOSs now, but there's all walks of life going through that process, which is to meet the minimum standard to be a Ranger, to start serving. And so, out there, close range and rifle PT and that, I guess, I was at least putting on a good show of not looking miserable. But so we had a cadre that was on staff duty or CQ or whatever that night. And so he was up there in the barracks teaching us knots. And it was probably the first time, maybe one of the only times that we had the opportunity to kind of have a free, open, discussion. And he was like, hey, what do you got? What questions do you guys have? And I said, Sharon, what is the likelihood that we'll go to the battalion that we choose? And he said, what's your MOS? 11 Bravo. He said, you're a dime a dozen. You'll go wherever you pick. Roger that. So my mom was an engineer out in Washington, King County Department of Transportation. So she, and I've been out there twice over school break and summer to visit. And so she's like, hey, you ought to really start investing now, meaning like in real estate. I have a friend that's a realtor. If you're coming out here, I'll talk to her about getting a house, and I'll help you make payments until you're able to make them fully on your own. And so she's like, I don't want to, move forward on this though, unless And so that's why I asked the question. And I said, Mom, he said, it's pretty much a done deal. So she starts working it and, gets it, generally locked in, got a closing date. And then, we're out there in the rocks calling off units, and they say first battalion, blah, 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 second battalion. And then they get to third battalion, and I'm like, oh shit, my heart drops. So what happened? of course, nobody picks 3rd Battalion because you spent your whole, as 11 Bravo anyway, your whole
Yeah.
time in the Army at Fort Benning. So it's like anywhere but Benning. And so I had a couple of reasons to not be at Benning, but so I, at the end of calling off 375, and they get to my name, and I go move over there, and then I say, "Excuse me, Sergeant, I got a question," which obviously just opened a can of worms. But so I tell them the story, get smoked for a while. I get brought into the cadre office. I think I high crawled in there, and I'm in there at the front line arrest, explaining to them, and so I tell them the story, and of course they're calling me fucking mama's boy and everything else. And
Oh yeah.
I mean, the way it was taken is my mom's buying me this house, which wasn't the case, but nonetheless, I took a fair share of harassment. And they said, all right, hey, after the abuse was done, they said, hey, we'll take a look at it. Freaking move out, we'll let you know. So a guy named Sergeant Ballinger, who was one of the rip tacks from 375, said he came out and pulled me off to the side and really gave me an earful. He said, hey, as rip tacks, each of us get 2 picks. And I picked you and a guy named Oakley to be 375 guys. And like, you basically just threw it back on my face. And I'm like, sure, I had no idea. I just, and so I'm apologizing. And, he's like, I said, sure, I have no problem with 375. He's like, nah, I got it, man. Like, we'll look into it. So I waited and waited and waited. And then I'm sitting there, we're filling out mail cards, and they said, hey, where's mama's boy at? And I knew exactly what they were talking about, but I ignored it. And they said, you know what we're talking about? Where's the kid that's mommy's bought him a house? And I'm like, God dang it. So I raised my hand, and they're like, hey, I got good news for you, Ranger buddy. Tell your mom to fucking sell it. You're going to 375.
Oh.
Sure. So luckily she hadn't moved forward on anything yet, but I do. So rip graduation day, I'm in the 375 DFAC, and we're in uniform, and everybody else still in PT. So we're in the buffet line there, getting my food, head down, and some ginormous dude in PT says, hey, Ranger, graduating rip today. I said, Roger Sharn, and the whole buffet said, it's our major. And I'm like, shit, it's our major. Sorry. And he's like, where are you going? I said, I'm going to 375, Star Major. And he's like, hello, I'm the 375 CSM. It was Ralph Beam. And he said, are you happy? I said, of course, Star Major, I'm honored. He said, well, where did you pick? And I said, well, I picked 275, Star Major. And he's like, why? I said, well, my mom telling the story. He's like, you ever been out to Washington? I said, I have, Star Major. He's like, you ever been to the jungles of Panama? Because that's where they were going soon. I said, no, Star Major, I haven't. He's like, well, you got to get off your mama's tit sometime, don't you? And anyway,
that's a total about Ranger Beam. God. God rest his soul.
That is like the classic, just like series of like stupidity that like you're like, God damn it, I don't want to arrive at a unit like this, because now the Sergeant Major knows my name and has a funny story. So mine was like a little similar, except for like I made a name because like they asked me my social, and when you're filling out all the cards and everything else, and then I'm like sitting there and I'm like, shit, did I say 0 or 1? Like, man, I think I said 0. And I was like, oh fuck, I think I told him my wrong social security card. So I go through it, and then of course, like we get our orders, and guess what? My social security card is wrong, or number's wrong on my orders. And I'm like, fuck, like I did such a good job. Like, and there's only like 11 of us left, and no one like really. And then so I had to go up and be like, hey, my social security is wrong. And they're like, why is it wrong? And they like pull out the card, that like we did for processing. They're like, this is what was on it. And I'm like, shit. Oh, yeah. And of course there was a attack from 275 that was there, and so that was one.
Everything then was on paper too, so it's very easy to mess up.
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't blame some clerk for fat fingering it. It was, there was no deniability on it. Yep. You sure the hell ain't gonna say, well, he messed it up, the rip tack, you were sure. I'm not gonna say that. But the one thing I did want to also, just I know this isn't necessarily, but man, your mom like telling you to invest in real estate, like, God dang, man, that is awesome. Like, I am doing that with my kids now, so my oldest stepson's 19. He's bought, now he's paying on his first property. Already talking to my 18-year-old son that's going to college this year. And I'm like, hey, you got to do your first year in the dorms. after that, I want you look, because I don't know, it'd be funny to look at where your mom was looking at for property, but imagine if it was in DuPont, dude, even if it was like a half acre, it'd be worth like a freaking $500,000, $1 million now. I mean, Jesus, like I always think of Justin Vinny when I talk about that. When he was a specialist, he bought, I don't remember how many acres in Steel, like right outside of Steelcom and DuPont. He bought like 10 acres. And then like after a deployment, he got like a bonus money or something like that. He had it sectioned off, and sectored for housing plots and everything else. He's never told me how much he sold it for, but he sold it for like, he sold it like 10, 12 years later. I guarantee he made a shitload. So anyway, so all the parents out there, don't learn from your lessons about your parents and what they didn't have you do it differently, because they're not making any more land.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, like, you'd be surprised in the influence, my one of my platoon sergeants, guy named Rob Nichols, was smart enough to, get us roped in early. He had a guy actually that I think you both know, Marcus Hull, who's part of the Three Ranger Foundation. Marcus is an investor, and so he had him down, talked to us all young guys about putting money away, and if you let it go before you realize it's part of your budget, then you never miss it. And so that was something that always stuck with me, and a reason I was always able to keep up with that trend. And I think it was great. If they wouldn't have targeted us at that young age, there it probably would have never happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. That's the one thing that like I wish I'd have just been better about. And I did have somebody tell me that, I just didn't listen, because that's a lot of beer.
Yeah.
You guys, you Sharon, Tammy and I bought our first house when I was on recruiting duty, before I went to the regiment. But like that initial investment just kind of continued to catapult me into the next investment home, the next investment home, which really allowed us to buy a house, a forever home, if you will, that we just never dreamed we'd have been able to do. But it started with mentorship and, a few people in my life, my family, saying this is a good thing to do. It's calculated risk. It's risk, but you can put in mitigations to make sure it's not a gamble. I remember speaking of Sergeant Major Alverson. He told me that one day, and I always remembered it. He's like, you're going to brief me on a gamble or a risk? And I said, oh, it's a risk. It's because a gamble, you're just kind of going out there, you ask to win, and the risk, you actually putting in some mitigating factors to make sure that something unsafe is going to be safe.
Yeah.
But Jess, we were sharing with Tommy. It's funny because the great thing that I've enjoyed about this podcast, one being humbled by the invitation to spend some time with Mike back in November, December timeframe. But now it's like every story that gets shared, it like sparks off another memory, because Sergeant Major Beam was this Ranger legend. And, I never had an opportunity to serve with him in the Ranger Regiment, but, as a very senior first sergeant, running that camp we had out in Kabul for a long time. He was a 3-star nominative that was giving us all of our money and resources to take care of our partners. So, him and at the time, my commander was Major Rich Thompson, another one out there. Need to write Rich's name down. We need to get him out here too. But he'd come out to see us, and he was just so happy when he came on camp. All he wanted to do was shoot and do combatives with us and work out in the gym and stuff. And, I had a great time and learned a lot from him. And he always took care of us. But, if he was around, he always came out to the camp. He at least shot with us one day. He ran through. He was just such a great coach and mentor. And I just felt compelled, to say God rest his soul, and thanks for everything Command Sergeant Major Beam did for the Ranger Regiment and our Army. And then, as every good story, our good friend Sergeant Major Rick Merritt, he told me a story when I was all boo-boo lip, because I was getting ready to pack my bags and go back home to Louisiana to be the senior military instructor at LSU, and I had to leave regiment, because I ran out of jobs. And he's like, "Are you coming back, Ranger buddy?" He's like, "Well, let me tell you a story about Sergeant Major Beam." He said, "What he did for me." He's like, he kicked me out to Panama to be a jungle instructor, like one of the best assignments I ever had. And he said, "I was kind of like you, all boo-boo faced," and paraphrasing a little bit. And he just looked at me in the eyes and he said, "Merritt, they're never going to name a building after you." He said, "To go to Panama, and do your charter time, whatever. But I don't know. Maybe Sergeant Major Merritt will make a liar out of Sergeant Major Beam in a good way. Because if I was getting a vote, I'd name a building after Rick Merritt. But just thought I'd share the assimilation to Panama and him telling you that and everything. But that was just a really funny story. I just remember spitting my water out when Sergeant Major Merritt told me that story because I was having to leave.
Is Sergeant Major Beam still alive?
No, he passed
Damn.
He passed.
within a year, I think.
It's been a year or two. Had a heart attack while riding his motorcycle.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I remember that. Yep. I remember. Yep. I do remember reading about that. God dang
Yeah.
it. That's like the problem is like with this podcast. Like it's amazing to sit down, Jesse. I mean, it's amazing to sit down with you, but like we just, there's so much to do, and there's so many people to talk to that we just like can't, and lining it up and reaching out to these folks. It's like, it's just, I wish we had a time machine, and I mean, I kick myself in the balls, for not have started this, like, 20 years ago, not that anybody would have listened to Corporal Burke, but, I mean, you get my point. Like, God dang it. Cause it's just so many things just lost, and we tell the stories, we pass the stuff down just like we're doing here, but, God, what I wouldn't give to be able to sit down with some of those, those Ranger greats. And then, obviously, a lot of the fallen guys, but the best we can do is tell their stories, as the saying goes, keep their names alive, so to speak.
I mean, Beam I was fortunate to get to go, he was CSM, obviously all the team leader courses, are ran by the, CSM and First Sergeant. So I went through and, of course, some of it's seems very cliche, but always had a good, story behind each, for one, he'd say, hey, every SOP written in the Army is somebody who did something stupid, but
yeah, that's true.
But so what officers say, don't expect what you don't inspect, and it's funny how guys like me and Al Pertus and folks in my platoon, a lot of the little, isms that our leaders bring up, I mean, at a certain point, as a young guy, you're just like, yeah, I got it, and then it kind of clicks one day. So he was a CSM from, I believe, 94 to 99, I think 5 years. I mean, that's got to be a record, but a long time to be a Ranger Battalion CSM,
Yeah.
Damn.
He made a run. He interviewed for Sergeant Major of the Army. I remember.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, I remember him getting prepared for the interview. He went to another 4-star nominative assignment, but I remember during that time when he come to visit, he was telling me, about it and whatnot. He was going to Washington to interview to be the Sergeant Major of the Army, and he was real lighthearted and humble about it and super comical. He's like, they just needed fodder, or he told me something like that, so I'm going over and knock the interview out, but it'd be a good time, just always super like motivated guy for sure.
He was
Ahead,
I think there's a fine balance between, a senior NCO. Obviously, we don't, today's day and age, you can't afford to have knuckle dragging beans and bullets guys.
Nope.
He very much kept it real with the NCO Corps. And as a matter of fact, I'd see him out at like memory lanes with cut off jean shorts and a tank top, raising the roof with the boys, and I'm like, I don't know how to handle this right now. We'll enjoy it while we can,
Yeah. That was our Army, that was just awesome times, man. Gosh.
I have a funny story I always tell about Hugh Roberts and that, like him just closing down bars, like, and taking like random Rangers that were just hanging out in the bar, And the one time he did it with me and one of my buddies, we just happened to be at a bar that he was at and closed it down, and said, all right, I'll drive you back, Rangers, because you guys don't have a plan, or you had one and it sucked. And then like on the way home, like he pulls outside the mall in Tacoma. He's like, I got to get my mom a Mother's Day present, so you guys are going to have to wait. And like, it didn't open for like 2 hours, and we're like, fuck, like, sort of like sitting in this car, like hung over, or well, actually still drunk, waiting for him. And I don't even know what he did. He probably went for like a run or something, and then went to the mall and went shopping and everything else. It was like we could just leave and like catch the bus, but like, what the hell? I do that to the sergeant major.
Nichols was he was the squad leader in my platoon, then my platoon sergeant, and then my first sergeant one day. So I worked under him quite a few times, and I've known him forever. But he won the USASOC NCO of the year, and Beam was a CSM, and so Beam was escorting him to USASOC for the NCO of the year competition, and or maybe it was the Army competition after USASOC, whatever it was, but he had to meet the CSM at the airport in Columbus, and so, we didn't call it slick, smooths, and roughs then, but it was, wear dress, nice clothes, travel attire. And so Nicholas shows up at the small Columbus airport ready to go. And then Beam comes rolling in right before the flight leaves. And he's got, again, freaking like flip flops, cut off shorts, tank top, and a assault pack. And so they tell him to dump his assault pack on the conveyor belt. He dumps it out. He's got a disc man and a strip of rubbers was his packing list.
Gosh. Yeah. I'm trying to remember how many years he had, but at the time when, Sergeant Major Beam, I kind of chose him as a mentor. I mean, every time he was there, I'm like, I'm not going to look the gift horse in the mouth. Like, I'm going to ask some really intelligent questions and get mentored by this nominative Sergeant Major. He's a Ranger legend. And he literally had more time as a Sergeant Major in the Army than I had in the Army at that time. And I was a senior first sergeant. Tommy Williams was the senior. I was two to Tommy in the RSTB at the time, and Tommy backfilled me. When Tommy left, I became the senior first sergeant in the battalion. Like time in service, time in grade, all that, not really mattered. But I just thought it was like, dang, man. And he was like 18 years, I think, 18 years as a sergeant major at that point. And I think at the time of his retirement, he was over half of his career was spent as a sergeant major. I remember.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild to think about. Plus, how stressful. Jesus Christ.
It's just cool to think.
I know we'll dive into the CSM stories. I was gonna, so just fun little legends, kind of question, that we'll put out to the masses. So let me see. Okay, help me think of nominative sergeant majors. Okay, so we got Barker, we got Albaugh. Who else? We got Albertson's retiring.
Chris Mullinex.
Okay.
Craig Bishop.
Okay, we got Bishop, but I think Bishop's retiring too, isn't he?
Yeah.
Is there anybody else out there?
Alex Caprati.
Yep. Okay, Caprati. That's a good one. Very good one. I'm going somewhere with this. I promise you.
Yeah.
Nat's
retired. He got
retired.
ID card, so he's official. I saw his post today on Facebook.
Yeah, he's official. Yep. We had him on Legends. The only exception we ever made was Teakle. Teakle, I guess, too, but Teakle's timing out. So, he could. They can always do exceptions, but we'll see what happens.
Eric Bohannon's nominative right now, too.
Bohannon. Okay, that's another good one. But we can pretty much just count Bohannon. I mean, come on. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just what I'm wondering is out of all those, I mean, we all thought it probably would have been Adam Nash, for sure. But who would be the first? Is any one of those going to maybe be the SMA someday? Because that's what we need, Ranger SM.
It's tough, man. I mean, we all know the deal. It's as much timing as it is capability, and the I mean, and I know you guys know this because you went out and served in the big Army, but I'll speak for myself. Like, you're not really known quantity and you got in the big Army, or else you PCS 100 times and all the same people intermingling across the Army, and then you show up and you're just some dude from the Ranger Regiment that nobody's met.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, literally that's what Abernathy. I don't know if you guys ever had the chance to serve with Abernathy, but he's just an amazing human being. But he was like, hey, literally, if you want to be competitive in the NOM world, you got to. And I was coming out of a brigade, but he was literally like, okay, everybody in the Ranger Regiment knows you, and everybody in Europe knows you. But there's like a whole other army that has no idea who the hell you are. So you got to go somewhere where people are going to know you and you're going to have lots of touch points. So, that's how I ended up in, Benning doing the first SFAB. Then I, retired.
Yeah. But the charter.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so
go ahead.
Obviously the skill set inverts at a certain point, and I mean, very much leadership focus as a platoon sergeant, probably first dabble into management. And then at a certain point, it's almost not that you shouldn't provide leadership throughout, but, I'd say, you bring up Adam Nash, probably one of the most organized, first sergeants, because that's, I didn't know him as a CSM, but you know, the organizational skills that Adam had was, you know, something we all aspire to have, you know. So it's just, but again, it's like the Peter principle, you know, everybody eventually gets promoted to their point of incompetence, you know. And so I always said, hopefully I'm not there yet. But uh, you know, to be honest, you know, even in business now, you know, we promote internally due to performance. We say we do it for potential, but it's not. You know, it's really hard to see potential until somebody goes out and shows what they're capable of. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's I think just kind of not being afraid to work on your weaknesses. You know, because being the, you know, PT stud, this, that, and the other, like nobody cares at a certain point. You know, so if you haven't shaped the other areas, you're kind of dead weight.
Yeah. I think your tactical ability and your ability to mentor, you know, the go-getters within your formation will get you through battalion. To a degree, you know. But then after that, like, you've really got to be focused on the other side of things and producing results indirectly, you know, through your systems, processes, and, you know, mentorship, you know, because if you're that brigade guy, like just spending all your time down at the tactical level, one, you're going to piss a lot of people off, two, but, you know, it's not going to move the needle on the organization.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely a balance. When I made the brigade list, I was full intentions of retiring, and so they, you know, the guy that was the brigade CSM was taking a division, and so I went in the seat for some months, and you know, you know, there were some things as a CSM that I was frustrated by with 3 brigade star majors, which 2 of the 3 had never even been in my battalion, you know, which careful what you wish for. I get that. But, you know, it's like, hey, man, nobody knows. You're just a picture on the wall, you know, and at a certain point, it's just the way it is at a certain level. But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that way at brigade. But, you know, I think people go so far to the extreme, the other direction, and they're just there running around following. You can follow the Boston meetings until you're blue in the face, you know. I think Dominic Coxell said it best. He's like, you know, you can sit in meetings till the cows come home, but if there's no outcomes in this meeting, like, let the staff do staff work. So, you know, the sergeant major will often get pulled into that because they're the senior enlisted and a good advisor to that staff, but there's got to be a balance, you know, and I think he had some pretty good insight on that.
Yeah, you gotta program it in. You gotta have it literally like blocked off. Otherwise, it's just not gonna happen. So, or you're gonna kick it down the road because of the fire that emerges, you know. So,
Sure.
yeah, because you came out on the brigade list. You were gonna go to JTF Bravo, weren't you?
No, even worse. It was Garrison. They were sending all the Ranger NCOs to Garrison. I don't know why.
I will tell you. So I've been down there a lot more fun than you think it would have been. Really, I mean, don't get me wrong. The problem with it is that you're a geobachin, and that's shit. But like even the Garrison or JTF Bravo down there in Honduras at Soto Cano, the base would probably get a little boring, but you know, you could travel around a lot. And it's beautiful down there, I will tell you. And there's really cool places to go to Honduras. But for a year, geobachin away from the family, yeah, that's a tough sell.
I'd come off 70-something months deployed with regiment. Of course, I went to a unit that's deploying. I made the list while I was deployed. I came back, and 6 days after we returned from a 9-month deployment, assignments came out. Congratulations, you got Soto Cano, Honduras, a year unaccompanied. I'm like, yeah, right. Like, no way I'm going to stay married if I take that job. So 80-something months deployed, and I was like, I can't. You know, my marriage wouldn't survive it. But not to mention, I had full intentions of retiring anyway, so it wasn't anything that surprised anybody. But yeah, and then so, you know, honestly, it was kind of sad the way it worked because I never like volunteered to be a brigade sergeant major and then changed my mind. I mean, you guys know how that works, but at that level, it's like the Army competes you. So I made the list, and then as a matter of fact, the first year the brigade commander said, "Hey, we're not going to give you a top block because we know you're retiring. We'll give it to somebody else." And I said, yeah, cool, you know, no worries. And then the next year, well, the guy I gave it to ended up getting fired. And he said, the next year, he said, "Hey, I'm just going to give it to you because that's who deserves it." I tried to game it and it didn't work out. So I'm just giving it to who deserves it. So he gives me the top block, and I made the list. And you know, they give me Honduras. So Mike Ferrucci, got the rest of the soul. He was a division sergeant major. And I tell him, I said, "Hey, you know, thanks for the congrats, but I'm full intentions of retiring. And he's like, okay, you know, and then he hits me up a week later and he said, hey, you said you're retiring, right? I said, yeah. And he said, you know, I talked to Sergeant Major Branch and they're going to deny your retirement if you submit it because they're under strength and brigade sergeant majors. And I was like, how do I honorably get off the bus? You know, I didn't compete for this, you know, I want to be done. And he said, well, you had a surgery before, right? I said, yeah, I have a neck fuse. And he said, just do a med board because the only criteria for med board is that it can't, if it worsens your condition, then you qualify, and yours definitely will. So I had to unfortunately go that route, which I hated because I had, you know, as you know, you can't predict when you're getting out, and you can't really do that off ramp like you would. And, you know, I chose to not even do a retirement ceremony. I was like, that's one less ceremony I can make my heroes show up for. So I'll just walk away whistling. But yeah, so that's how I had to go out. But you know, all good.
Hey man, I'd do the same thing. They denied mine 3 times. Actually, they denied my retirement twice. The third time, they didn't even bother like doing anything with it. They did nothing with it. Like it sat there, I think 9 months. It didn't do anything. So yeah, I had to go the same route, bro.
Yeah. And it's, you know,
It
somebody
sucks.
said it once, it's like the time in your life when you need the most predictability. Your kids are in high school, and that is when you have the least. And that's what, you know, if I said it to Troxel when he came to regiment, I was doing opposite regiment, and you know, he's like, hey, do you compete on the CSL? I said, yeah, I did, Sergeant Major. And he's like, you got picked up? I said, I did, going to the 82nd. He's like, oh, great. I was in 82nd, you know, 1st Brigade as well. And I said, now, he's like, are you happy? I said, of course, I'm honored. And he said, well, you know, where did you pick to go? And I said, honestly, Sergeant Major, I just gave the list to my wife because I didn't know what these units even meant. You know, I knew it was 1st, 2nd, 3rd Ranger Battalion. You know, 2nd of the whatever. I'm like, had to Google it. And so he said, I said, so we picked location. I said, but Bragg was at the bottom of my list, and I got Fort Bragg, you know, and I said, you know, if the Army's trying to talent manage, I'm not sure they're doing a good job. I said, I just come off a pretty long deployment with RSTB, and I said, you know, if I'm, you know, it's going to be my wife tapping the mat after this 9-month deployment. And, you know, his words to me was, unfortunately, yeah, they don't. He said, I guarantee they looked at you, said he's an E9 master rated and not on profile. He's going to the 82nd, you know?
Yep.
So,
yeah. Well, they did the same thing in my Sergeant Major Academy. All of us Rangers were going to the 82nd. And you could tell by the line number before the list. Like, basically, you knew where you were going. You could predict. You wouldn't know what battalion, you just knew what unit, right? And then basically the Sergeant Major of the Army said, hey, this list wasn't talent managed properly, so we're redoing it. And I actually got my #1 pick when they redid the list. It delayed the announcement. I don't remember how long, like 6 weeks or something like that, but yeah. And that's how I got 2CR. Nice. So, and I was happy with that, you know, but
yeah.
Well,
Italy
I think
was my first choice, and then Hawaii was my second. And I don't remember from there. I think my first CONUS was just because I liked the area was 101st. You know, I wouldn't have changed it. It was a blessing. Yeah. You know, I had an awesome time, but you know, but in hindsight, you know, I think the Army should, you know, do a better job at trying to retain folks at that level. You know, I mean, to me, it's kind of, yeah, I mean, you guys know this, but it's like, hey, you should be appreciative of what you got. Just be a you know, a servant leader, selfless leader, and just take the job we give you. And it's like, of course, I've done that forever. But you know, I want to stay in as long as I can, longevity wise. But I want to finish this whole deal with you know, Mrs. Navarro in tow still, you know, and sometimes that's probably been questionable with all the late nights and deployments. So, you know, try to give her a vote for once.
Yeah. I remember Sergeant Major Rothke told me, you know, I don't know if you guys remember Sergeant Major Rothke, but he told me, I think it was the E6, maybe I was in E7. Basically what he told me was, you have more control over your life as a private than you do as a Sergeant Major. I was like, you know, at the time I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're a Sergeant Major, like you're the man. Like, and then, you know, when you become a Sergeant Major, you're like, oh shit, man, that was spot on. Like, you know, like how true was that, you know?
Yep. I heard him say that too. I guess the Army left me alone, but you know, I was still hiding behind the big brown fence. So I was able to go out pretty quietly. You know, it was hard to go in and, speak with Sergeant Major Blake and General Miller at the time, tell them I, made my peace with it. And it's time for the USA family to roll up the carpet, whatnot. But I mean, you guys sharing that story just reminds me of so many others that went through the same exact thing. And I know Jesse and I have had tons of these conversations, because when Jesse was the CSM at 82nd, I was at JCU, and we were neighbors and our wives were friends. So we got a chance to do a lot of water cooler talking on the weekends.
Yeah.
It wasn't First Sergeant Fridays, it was CSM weekends when we were around, hanging out and just going back through. And my thoughts on it still, and candidly, I'm kind of removed from that last couple of years, and I purposefully don't involve myself to give opinions, because I can't be part of the solution any longer. But I don't know any Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies in America that don't allow their senior executives to have a say so in what they do. It goes back to your points, Jesse, where, if you're promoted into incompetency, then you got a chance to figure it out, aka the sink or swim plan, and be a fast learner, because you might have developed fast. But I just don't get it, where I've even seen scenarios when, you lay out a common operating picture, across the globe, and you got very talented senior enlisted leaders that their family needs to go to that geographical location, and they would be an excellent leader in that organization, skill sets match, and then vice versa. But, just because of the sake of like, we put it on black and white paper, and we're not recanting that, you're going to go here. And, oh, by the way, we're going to hold your orders. I remember seeing some of my peers, and I felt so sorry for them, because I had orders like in March. In fact, speaking of, Jesse came out to give me my critical events PT test with Phil Paquette, Sergeant Major there in the 1st Ranger Battalion now, and their medic, to run me through executive RAS critical events before my interview. And I had orders shortly after that event. And my classmates like, how did you get orders? I said I did a critical events PT test and did an interview, and went through a selection process to get selected. And they couldn't understand how I still had orders. Like, some of them they didn't understand how a regiment operated on that. But it's valid points we're talking about. It's like, challenge the Army to think a little more critically. Love the Army. I'm not armchairing, but like, at this point, like, I remember being part of that conversation. My class, I was class 64, went to Sergeant Major's Academy in 13, graduated in 14. We were like the guinea pig class. They were rewriting the POI, revamping, taking us to graduate level projects for writing, etc., which a lot of folks struggle with if they didn't have college, and we kind of worked through those eaches. But it was all about the select, train, promote model, to where you would have a little more say so, and where you could go based upon validated skill sets. And I had a good friend, also former Ranger, and spent a lot of time in the SMUs, Rob Flaker. He used to talk about talent assignment and not talent management. He said it takes more deliberate action in planning to do true talent management versus just assignment. Like, at that level, going back, listening to you all's comments, like, my thoughts, like, all those names we spoke about were qualified to be Sergeant Major of the Army. In my opinion, I'm looking at 2 of them right now. Tremendous amount of respect for your professional acumen, your leadership examples, etc. But at the same point, you get to the C-suite level, you got kids. Some cases you have grandkids, you have wives that have been there, multiple deployments. I mean, I'm doing some figurative math here, but I think 3 of us here, we probably have over 50 deployments, or close to, between the 3 of us. We take a look at it. So
Probably pretty close, actually. Yeah.
I would prefer to retain Command Sergeant Major Navarro, because we had this conversation, then lose him, because I can't work with him on his geography, or give him an assignment to where he's going back. And we can pick all the other names, because we still get the calls. But I'm glad you brought that up, Jesse, because I think it's important for us to share those lessons, and maybe re-chime a bell that might have just went dormant, got a little dust on it, because they're like, oh yeah, it's always been like that. I'm just going to move out because I'm not going to be able to make a difference. But I think if the senior enlisted leaders of the Army really want to challenge themselves, there's a good administrative challenge. And also a retention challenge too, as well. When you look at the juxtaposition between, we were an Army that everyone stayed in for so long because we just felt obligated and committed to continue to serve based upon our obligation to each other, speaking for our organization.
Yeah.
On
Well,
the
I mean,
flip,
I think that's the conundrum of, what's the balance between doing, what you love versus, allowing somebody to stifle themselves from, growth, and the two examples I have in the regiment about that were when I managed the dog program, I was, RSM, Palliser and Hardy were switching out, and I was giving them, a desk side on canine program. And I was recommending that we lift the 2-year minimum or 2-year maximum. I said, I understand they're 11 Bravos. I understand, but they love what they do. And it takes a solid year to really learn the job. And so I was able to squeeze an extra year from 2 to 3. But, Pallister's comments to me was, I had the saw gunner or machine gunner, and he knew everything he was going to know about a machine gun in 8 months. And that's all he wanted to do is be a gunner. And if I'd have let him do that, he would have, never went anywhere and he capped out. But I forced him, and then he became a command sergeant major. And, and that's a great story, obviously. So there's definitely that.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it's like what was happening is our dog handlers were getting out of the army so they could go be dog handlers as cops and everything else. It's like, well, we're not really doing that, like we're bleeding them out because of this. So I think you got to look at every situation different. I would say the regiment, there's a lot of benefit to staying at a Ranger battalion for a really long time, and so therefore I would say there's a lot of benefit. There's guys that I had a lot of NCOs that spent a lot of time in the 82nd and they don't want to go anywhere else, which was baffled me because it's just a meat grinder. And I'm like, these dudes want to do nothing but just ride the lightning with the pain train. And you want to send them to freaking be a recruiter. And now they're going to get out. So like, why? And that's what always killed me. It's like anybody else will get out of the army because they have to go be in the 82nd. So it's like, we do it just to force it because we can, the army that is. And then all of a sudden, we both lose. So, again, I know there's a yin and a yang to all this, but nonetheless, I think, it says a lot, when you let people have, some quality of life of what they enjoy doing. And the last example I was going to give, because I was a recce platoon sergeant and a detachment NCO at one point for recce and snipers and TSE, when I got to 275 and I'm sending guys to specialty platoons, I was very passionate about this because from those jobs and even canine, I dealt with getting people's trash. And so I said, hey, I'm not going to do that to you. If I send you a guy and I'm relieved, then I effed you. And if I send you a person and it hurt, then I did the right thing. I'm not going to necessarily send you my best. That's just, it's not honest to say that I would do that. And that best guy I got may be the glue in that platoon, And so I can't promise you my best, but I promise you it'll hurt. And that's what I always did. And nothing against Brian, but Brian Barker was the HAC first sergeant, and the psych got involved and said, psych's like, oh, he's got a better profile to be a sniper. And we basically did a rotate one jumper to your right. And I'm like, hang on, like these guys were passionate and wanted to do this job, like, I'm gonna be honest with you, like, I don't give a shit what the psych says. I know he's got a PhD in freaking talking to people, but I got an honorary doctorate in being a Ranger, and like he's wrong, So
Yeah.
I'm like, Brian, I'm gonna stop sending you the rock stars, man. If you're just gonna put them some job that they hate and they end up getting out, And so I was very against that.
Yeah. I wish more leaders realize the benefit of that though. Like, hey, not necessarily your top talent, but it should hurt, because, especially like in organizations like Ranger Regiment, but even other organizations as well, like, because, well, I don't want to give up the talent. Listen, like, I have a lot of experience. Giving up your talent enhances your whole organization. Not that linchpin guy, like, not the Staff Sergeant Perez's, of Charlie Company 275. Like, I never would have given that fucking dude up, but because he's my rock star in Charlie Company. But the other guys, like, you got to give those guys up because other people are going to step into the fold. They're going to rise to the occasion, and I saw that a couple times, throughout my career, that you think this guy's like, he's a rock star, but you move him and it's good for him professionally, and he sees something, that maybe he didn't want to do, but like after he does it, it really kind of changed, what he did as a leader and how he grew as a leader. But more importantly, because he was such a beacon for that whole organization, that platoon, whatever you're talking about, it kind of stifled the other leaders below. And now that he's gone, they're like, okay, now it's time, to step up to the plate and show, what I can do and how I can do it. I've always seen it as a benefit of giving up talent, like, not only for, CAG selection, but SF or, anything else they wanted to do, and, a lot of leaders just don't think that way. But, Jesse, the other thing I really wanted to come back that you talked about was leading the dog program.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that because we have not talked about that on Legends. Like, honestly, I just don't even know if we've mentioned it. I could be wrong. I'm getting a little forgetful in my old age. So, like we all are. And, falling out of planes, getting blown up, how that all works. So, but anyway, so talk about, did you stand up the program or you were selected to go be a platoon sergeant?
No, so I came back from rope, back to 3rd Battalion, and as a matter of fact, we had to fill a list of where you want to go after RTD, and I put back to 375, and so I got a call from Sergeant Major Walker, and he said, "Hey, bud, I seen you on this list. Like, you want to come back to 3rd Battalion?" I said, "Right, Sergeant Major." He said, "Well, why didn't you come talk to me?" And I said, "Well, by the time my time's given back and I can come back, it'll be Sergeant Major Merritt, just taking over. So figured I'd engage him." And he's like, no, it's not how it works, bud. Like, I lock it in and then he falls in on it. So I said, okay, I didn't know. And he said, well, when you got time, can you be down here in 5 minutes? I said, yeah, I'll head down now. So I sat in his office and, talked, and he said I was going to go to the air shop. And I guess the look on my face was kind of disappointing. And he's like, you got a problem with that? I'm like, no, Sergeant Major, it's good. And he's like, you sure? He's like, the way he looked. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. He's like, okay, I thought you'd say that. I thought you'd say I'd wash canteen cups if I had to get back. And I said, yeah, no, whatever you need. And he said, but honestly, where'd you think you were going to go? I said, well, Sergeant Major, I was going to take a platoon. I went up, went rip and rope. And he said, no, you got to do your time and staff. And I said, well, Sergeant Major, my choice was go to staff or go to RTD. So I chose RTD. But now what you're telling me and people after me are like, if you choose that, you're going to fall behind your peers 2 years. So, he's like, okay, well, the recce platoon might be opening. Would you want that? I mean, to be completely frank, I didn't even like doing reconnaissance. But I'm like, yeah, I'll do whatever you need me to do. Like, any platoon is the way to go. I mean, now that I'm more mature, I know that it's all important, but of course, I kind of question folks that would give up a platoon to go on staff, so I went to recce, and I, from there, they were standing up or discussing standing up the dog program at regiment. So I went to a lot of the meetings, and the initial guy was a guy named Rob Watts. He was a staff sergeant, been a staff sergeant for a really long time. And so he kind of helped start it. The real official NCIC was Rob Haney. And then Haney was replaced by, once he really got it stood up with, so it was him and all the seniors from the other SOF elements. And I believe this is pretty accurate, but they went around to all the major kennels in the US. I think that the 28th kennel, they talked to was Von Lick Kennels. And Ken Licklider was running out of some action buildings in Peru, Indiana, and was an old handler for the Air Force security force in Vietnam. And so most of the folks they approached either said, you can't train a multi-purpose canine, or we just think that the Army is going to, or the military is going to stand this thing up, and then we're going to have to grow in size and scope so large that you guys will drop the mic and we'll go out of business. So, but for one reason or another, everybody avoided it. And it wasn't until they got to VLK, and he's like, "No, you absolutely can. I've actually trained dogs for, tracking, bite work or patrol work and explosives." And so that kind of kicked it off, and we had representation from all the tiered units, and kind of started there. There were some personality conflicts that caused some folks to go away very quick and do their own thing. But Regiment and SF and MARSOC stuck with it, and then actually MARSOC got in late; they weren't there yet, and so we had some vanilla SEALs that would come and do a course and stuff as well. MARSOC was actually doing a tracking course separate at that time, but so yeah, I mean, I fell in with it established, but there was nothing in place yet. There was no SOPs. There was nothing, so we were starting to get held accountable from the Army. We got to do the, 190-12 or whatever it is, inspections. And we have to have kennel masters, so I know Kevin Nelson was the canine platoon sergeant 275. So he went to kennel master course. So we could, some of those were like, whether you're the civilian trainer or you're the platoon sergeant, one of you two needs to be a certified kennel master for us to pass inspection. So, and a couple of the other battalions, they had a guy that had used to be a kennel master, so that sufficed. But with Kevin, he went to kennel master course and basically said he, walked around an ammo can as a dog for 8 weeks, and typical Army training, right? And or Air Force training in that case at Lackland. But so yeah, we grew the canines to, I think when I left, we had 39 dogs and 3 spares. My problem was the 3 spares and three spare handlers at Regiment. I mean, you guys know the deal, but it's kind of like RRC showing up to a MLAT. Like, people are just looking for a reason to F you down. You're like strike 2 before you even start because you're not part of the team. Yeah. That's how they were. So my recommendation was, let's dissolve the regimental handlers into the battalions, because, they had to commit them every deployment anyway. And, it was just easier for them to internally manage. And they weren't like showing up like some, the bastard at squad, as Colonel Hodney would say, the dude from Regiment that doesn't know shit about dogs or whatever they perceive as the problem. So we made some modifications, did some certifications for both handlers and trainers for the dogs as well. And we actually tried to take our dogs. We were getting rid of so many dogs from PTSD. And I don't know if that's ever been addressed. When I left, and when I checked in with Dondi, who was a 375 trainer, and then regimental trainer, I see him where I live in the Harris County, Georgia area. It's still a problem, but these dogs get PTSD from, something happened to their handler or whatever. And we took a dog from, I believe it doesn't matter, but it was one of the battalion's dogs. And we put it through ended up being 2 basic courses. Or no, 1 basic course, 2 finishing courses. They're exposed to helicopters, flashbangs, gunfire, everything. Simulated, replicated combat the best we possibly could in scenarios. And the dog just crushed the rest in all those events. So we ended up needing to put the dog in a fight. We flew it over to Germany. Adam Licklider was one of the regimental guys I had. Handed it off to, I believe, 175. And brought the dog first mission on target. Dog shuts down and starts cowering. Of course, the RS3 is like, Jesse, like, what the F? Like, we just flew this dog over, and it's like, sir, I'm glad it happened, because this just shows, we got tens of thousands of dollars invested into the dogs and twice that in training. And we did everything to replicate combat we could with this dog, and to include like dudes wearing man jams that came from overseas. And that dog was fixed in our eyes, and we get it overseas. As soon as it smells Afghanistan, probably smells adrenaline, all the different stuff that we can't, know as a human, dog shuts down. So we had to start, adopting the dogs out. And, and some of these dogs were going to Murfreesboro, Tennessee Police Department and winning the Canine Olympics after that. They were fixed, but take them to Afghanistan or some scenario like that, they probably would have had the same problem. But riding with a cop and having a different life, so it was good. There's a Robbie law that keeps, allows us to not have to put the dogs down, because prior to that, they did. So we did everything we could to try to keep those dogs getting adopted out versus put down. But as I know you guys know, when your dog does bite work, every day in training, and then, flashbang followed by a dog off leash to a bite every time, the dog would we started getting to the point where we wouldn't let dog off leash, and the dog would be so frustrated he needed something to bite, and it'd bite a assaulter, and so we're like, hey, we really need to back off what we're doing with these dogs. You don't need to train bite. That's what's sexy, so everybody wants to train that, but it's like, you don't have to do that often. And really, what I felt, not that I'm some dog whisperer, I didn't know shit, but I was at least open-minded enough compared to some others. There's a saying in the dog world that the only thing that 2 dog trainers agree upon is that the third guy's fucked up. And I think that's very true. So when we, I came from a 11 Bravo perspective and had to be the decision maker in a lot of cases. So I try to be open-minded. And what some of the law enforcement that we trained with, like a guy named Mike Deal, probably one of the very few dog trainers that nobody will talk shit about. He's from somewhere out in Indiana, and he was like, "Hey, I know why soft selects the dogs you do, but it's just too high risk for law enforcement. Like we need our dog to verbal recall. We need, and so eventually regiment started going down that road, looking at more of a, camp or a Schutzhund French ring, more of a sport trained dog than a KMPV dog that is typically up our alley. It's KMPV is the Dutch Royal Police training certification. Those dogs will dive through windows and extract pokes out, and it's great. But they get trained by the not the checks, but the I'll think of it a second. But they beat the dogs with pipes, and they stake them out in the freezing cold tundra, and those dogs are hard, but they're all a little bit screw loose when we get them, and you don't know when they're going to snap. Some never do, and some do very quick. So I learned a lot of lessons with that. I think it's unfortunately, I hate to see that. I don't know if they stood down dog program yet, but I heard they were gonna, and that's kind of one of those, you can't break glass in case of war and just have a dog program. So I hope they don't, because as we all attest, they've saved. My wife used to cry every time I'd have to go into work because we lost a dog. I'd have to meet it, at Benning and then get it cremated. And she's like, this is crap. Like those dogs didn't volunteer to do this. And I'm like, babe, every one of those dogs died. Like you can attribute to saving a ranger's life. I know, but they didn't ask. And I'm like, babe, like, but how about me? Like and she's like, well, I'm sorry, babe, but you volunteered to do. I'm like, what the fuck? You choose the dog over me? She's like, well, you chose to do this. You knew you were getting into. So, that was harder for her than me. But, we all honor the dogs, have them on our memorials, and as we should. And, I hope that we're smart enough to keep at least a contingent in the future.
Yeah. At least something up at the regimental level with a high concentration of expertise. I agree.
Yeah, it goes back to soft truths. I mean, the dogs fall into that, same philosophy. Can't be mass produced.
No, they can't.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're absolutely right.
I remember the early days of, before we had, the regimental dog program, and still, even in the soft community, with the brothers and everything else, that, man, those fucking dogs, man, some of those things were goddamn psychopaths. Like, I freaking watch it. I watched, I think it was a Navy SEAL. I want to say it was the Iraq invasion. Like this Navy SEAL was getting like drugged like across the hangar by his goddamn dog, this handler. The dog just lost its shit and just beat his ass, So, it came a long way. And now, we're, we had dogs that, just vicious, but then at night, are like sleeping in their handler's bed. Like, the handlers use them as a pillow. Like, it was unbelievable.
That's hard to do too. And, I'm biased, but I think most trainers would agree. For some reason, and actually Nate Dunn was a dog PM at one point. He was a dog platoon sergeant when I was still in the seat. And Nate's wife's a vet tech, and he just had a lot of experience with animals. And he's got a Dutch Shepherd. And in my experience, the chances of you having a mentally unstable dog as a Dutchie are very high. I guess to just say that. So I don't know if it's a breeding thing or what, but if I think our ratio of crazy dogs when they were Dutchies was almost 100%. And it was, and some of it's guys just not knowing how to train. You put a heavy-handed ranger with the dog that's a female, the dog cowers and shuts down. You break the dog basically. So coupling that pair up has gotta happen. And then the deal, but. You let your dog psych you out, and you scoot the food in the kennel and shut the door. You just created a new standard, and now you can't feed a dog any other way or it's going to bite you, so it's like some of that stuff. I don't think, again, back to this takes years and years to master. We can't just make it you're the goose gunner, It's a little different than that.
But. Yeah, it is. It is a fur missile, but yeah, that's good. I love it. I'm glad we talked about that. And, dogs are, hot on my mind too. So, I've been a little bit out of sorts, and Clay's been picking up the slack, but unfortunately we had to put my dog down Monday night, that my wife actually bought for me 11 11 years ago for my birthday, and I had to put him down on my birthday.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Oh,
To
yeah.
lose a kid.
Yeah. Well, what really, what made me laugh too is my wife said all the time that if she could make Charlie into a man, she would marry him. She wouldn't be with me. Like she would, like, she loved that dog more than me. And it was well known.
Wow.
I can't blame her. He was a good dog, man. Freaking awesome. Best dog ever. So all right, let's move on past this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm gonna stay. There's no crying on legends. Wow, that's not true.
Sure. So Jesse, we've covered a lot of ground, and I do want to peel it back as well, because we talked about some of your more senior positions, but I want to go back to, like, obviously you earn your black beret and your scroll, and then you're assigned to 3rd Ranger Battalion, and you find yourself in the infamous Bravo Company 375, who has just legendary Rangers missions, etc. In your own words, and it doesn't have to be 2 or 3, but talk to us about some of the more significant missions that you were a part of, that you were spoken at will, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear your thoughts and your experiences.
Yeah. I got to BCO. I was 2 Bravo. Unfortunately, I think my first couple platoon sergeants were examples of what not to do. I think every one of my peers would agree with that statement. But not that they were criminals or anything, but just not the best example. I'll just leave it at that. So I got to the platoon, and we had hardly any Ranger qualified folks, because my platoon sergeant said, hey, if you weren't, it was an OML, and the same people got sent and the same people failed. And so luckily, timing wise, when I got there, the platoon sergeant he was platoon sergeant 4.5 years by the end of his time. And he finally had an epiphany. He said, hey, the highest scores go. So I got to go to Ranger School PT test. I think, I don't know, 4 months into my time in battalion, and scored well. But when I did the physical, they said, hey, you have bronchitis, which turned into pneumonia, because I had a really bad cough. So they pulled me in, and then I ended up getting to go a few months later. But so I got to battalion, went to jungle training in Panama, went to, I don't know, you know how it is. It's like the shortest amount of your time in the Ranger Battalion is as a private, but it feels like the longest part of your career, because every day you're, at least for me, I wake up 30 minutes before first call, just sick to my stomach, because I knew I was going to throw up every run. And my squad leader was a cross country runner in college, and I was the second slowest guy. I won't name the first because he might listen to this, but he was my only saving grace. He'd fall out before I did, and I think my run time was 12:40, and but that was by far the slowest in the squad. So in those days, all we did was run 5 days a week and push-ups and sit-ups. We weren't even allowed to go in the gym. So obviously O courses and stuff like that. But so I think we've gotten smarter than but I do think the mental toughness, the learn how to tie your boots, adjust them, all the field craft stuff, and there's just things you can't replicate in the gym. So obviously there's a balance. But I graduated Ranger School, went straight through, which I always said I wish I had recycles. I might have learned something. All I learned is I'm a little bitch when I'm tired and hungry. I get moody. That's besides that. I just kind of played Survivor and didn't get voted off the island. But honestly, like, I was PT'd, to death as a private. So when I went to Ranger School, it was always, I went class 2. So when that class is obviously heavy West Point officers. So me and Eric Bonapane and one guy named Freeman from 175 were in the same platoon, and it was almost the rest were officers. And so it turned into, hey man, can you help carry some of this stuff? And I'm like, yeah, but don't forget about me when it's time to do peers, or if I'm a PL for planning. And they didn't. So I always tell folks, it's just Survivor. Like, play the game, know how to, help people out, and they'll help you out. But nonetheless, I come back, I called from Florida and said, hey, I'm graduating. And my squad leader said, hey, congrats, you're going to be a Bravo team leader. I said, well, what what happened to Sergeant Wechter? He said, he's taking Alpha team. I said, what happened to my team leader, Sergeant Gray? And he said, we'll talk about that when you get back. I'm like, okay. So I came back, my team leader was there to pin my tab on, but he's a private, which was weird because he pissed off for cocaine, which explains why he ran me to death all the time. But nonetheless, never seen it in my life. He did date a stripper and stuff, so I guess it should have been obvious, but nonetheless, he kind of broke me off every day and PT'd my ass off. He was a good marksman. He was a good, besides that crap, I didn't see it. So I took a fire team right away. Back in those days, they gave us 10 days of two work weeks of time off to, get your shit sewn up and DX and all that stuff. I was, I think the Thursday before that weekend of going back to work, my squad leader comes up, because I live in the barracks, so I'm still there. And he's like, hey, Navarro, here's your orders to specialist and here's your orders to corporal. And I'm like, I spent like all the money I had putting specialists on my uniform just like 3 days ago. And he's like, I'm like, Sharon, I just put specialists and everything. He's like, have corporal sewn on by Monday. What are your questions? I'm like, fuck, Roger. So I did, but I was team leader for a while. They made me a squad leader. I didn't know better, but I didn't have enough time. So they sent me the staff sergeant board. And after the board, they said, hey, we messed up. We sent you too soon. You don't have enough time to go even with the waiver. So we're going to reboard you in, 4 months or something. And in my head, I'm like, the fuck, that I got to go through this bloodbath again. Actually, Ralph Beam was on my board or was the president of the board. So they decided, hey, change of plan. We'll ghost his packet. He's already been through it. So I pinned staff sergeant on September 1st of 2001. 10 days later, the towers went down and I deployed. Went over to Oman and obviously I'd been a squad leader for, I don't know, a year plus or something as a sergeant, but we went over for the invasion. I was part of, and again, this is my version of the story and how I see the world. I think everybody sees it similar, but my platoon leader at the time and platoon sergeant weren't loved by the command team, the company command team. I think the company command team kind of had their favorites, and the PL and platoon sergeant. Well, the platoon sergeant was Eddie Nolan for that platoon, and the PL was I can't remember his name, but he was NCO in Somalia. So they were kind of the favorites. Mine were exact opposite because they pushed back on a lot of stuff. So we deployed last of the 3 platoons. We get to Oman, and the other 2 platoons had already headed out to USS Kitty Hawk. We literally had some boxes of ship paper, some UVAC sunglasses, and a note that said "Good luck." And so we were told, "Hey, we're not going to do any platoon missions." It was unheard of at this time. One, it's like, "Hey, sorry to break it to you, but you guys are like the permanent guard detail." So we were for probably a good, I don't remember what it was, a month, I guess. So over that. So I forget how long we were in country, and then the first Rhino kicked off, and obviously SECO did that, and then some folks from BECO launched from the Kitty Hawk with some folks from other units, and for going after Omar, and so they came back to the Kitty Hawk, and almost out of nowhere, it was like, hey, we got another mission, and first platoon that came back from the Kitty Hawk, so the BECO was tagged with a mission, and the command team picked 1 Bravo. And the battalion commander and command sergeant major, which was Colonel Bannock and Sergeant Major Brimson, they said, hey, now 2 Bravo's been here doing shitter guard escort, fucking you name it, guarding the CG's house, just eating shit sandwiches and smiling, and that was the thing about Rob Nichols. He was a great NCO, and he said, hey, this is our mission. We're going to fucking do it like 2 Bravo expected to do it, like nothing but professional. Like, period. I don't give a fuck if this is all we do the whole deployment. This is the way we represent, and we did. And so it paid off because the battalion command team said negative. This platoon sat here and got fucked the whole time, and they were nothing but professional. And we were directing that it's 2 Bravo. So we end up having 2 squads with guns attached jump in with some CCT folks into Afghanistan. We secured a dry lake bed. They had to do soil samples, make sure the ground was hard enough to land. It was Objective Bastogne is what we called it then. Later it became DLS Shiloh when we used to do desert landings with the CASA.
Okay. Yeah.
And we offloaded or we jumped in. It was zero loom back in those days. We wouldn't do a mission unless it was blackout. So we were actually jumping for 500 feet. So one of my guys was Kurt Donaldson was helping us GMPI, and he has my guy sit down and pulls his reserve by accident. So it wasn't a big deal. We weren't on a big time crunch. So we were getting him a new reserve. And Hugh Rose was my first sergeant. He says to Dan Wilson, who was the commander, he said, "Hey, sir, like, why are we even wearing reserves? They're not going to work at 500 feet. It's just more weight." He's like, "Well, what do you recommend we do for sergeant?" He's like, "Fuck it, let's take them off." So he's like, "All right, take them off." So we ended up taking all our reserves off, and we rolled the waistbands and taped the waistband and just jumped in with mains only. So we exited at 500 feet, and I just didn't have a good feel for what 500 feet felt like when it was pitch black. So by the time I probably didn't count, because I don't think I ever counted. And just
I love the truth. Yeah.
And then go to check canopy. I can't see anything. I'm jumping. I was company master breacher, so I got a bunch of explosives in a assault pack in case we need to blow the aircraft. And so I wanted to lower it to not land on explosives, and even though I knew it would probably just hurt my leg, but I kicked the assault pack. Of course, it went lower because it was too light. And after about the third kick, I hit the ground, broke my foot. We consolidated all the Garmin 12s we had in the company for us because there was no train features. It was just a big piece of dry lake bed. So I hit go to my assembly area. It was like, I don't know, 3-4K away. And we had to carry our parachutes out because we wanted to leave no signature. Plus, we didn't want to get sucked up in the jet. So I'm trying to run with a broke foot with the freaking. So eventually it went numb, but then I was afraid I was like stepping on my ankle instead of my foot. So I don't know if I was causing permanent damage, but as soon as I get to my blocking position, we're set in, and my PL was a guy named Sean McCrae, ended up being B Squadron commander at the unit. Sean was like, "Hey, got bad news, man. I need you to take a group of dudes and go police up the Air Force guys' chutes. They left and right. We're trying to land planes, and they already got their CCT equipment set up." So I'm like, "You MFers, fucking Air Force," So we ran, got their chutes, came back, and the rest, went fine. We're sitting there, couldn't let anything get within distance of the aircraft. So I got a goose team right here, and I see this vehicle coming, and headlights, and I'm like, game on, HE round, fucking, let's go. And so we're waiting, and I'm like, dude, this guy must be stopped, And so we have the JTAC call the aircraft, the C-130, and he's like, yeah, they're 28 kilometers away. We're like, oh fuck, go ahead and lock clear, like, I mean, it looked like right there, because it's middle of the desert. But that was my very first experience in Afghanistan. And then we went home, took leave, came back. ACO stayed over and went up to Bagram. Then we came back, did a round robin, Shkin, Kandahar, Bagram, month apiece. We were doing the PSD for Karzai at the time before he was the official president. But then Iraq kicked off. I was going to go Delta selection because, at that point, minus the jumps and stuff, I just, Birch was the 375 CSM, talked to me quite a bit. I was a little bit disappointed on that last deployment of the stuff we were doing in support of the other units. So I'm like, if I got to go there to do, what I deem as the shit I want to do, then I'll go there. So I went, me and Tom Smith, who, retired out of there, went and took PT test together, and, did fine, of course, and had a date. And then Iraq started spinning up, and Dave Doyle, 2-star now, was my company commander. He's like, hey man, you might want to pull your packet. We got some stuff really looking good. And I'm like, yeah, sir. Like, if it's anything like Afghanistan, I'm sure I'm not going to miss anything. And so I kept blowing it off. And at the time, they'd only read the first sergeant commander on anything being planned. So everybody else just sat over there and did watch drills, tape drills, and waiting on the word, if you will. So you can only do so much hip pocket training. So one day Doyle said, hey, come with me. We walk across the street, do a read on, and then he briefs me on, Baghdad, airfield seizure, H1, all this follow on Sadifa. I'm like, okay. So I walked across the street, called the Delta recruiter, said, hey, pull my packet, I'm gonna stay. And I never looked back. After that, of course, we stayed busy, and that's what I joined the Army to do. So I I enjoyed my time there. And as I told folks all the time, the regiment had my next job picked for me before I finished the last job. So I didn't really always have a whole lot of say in that, but nonetheless, I have no regrets. I'm glad to have worked where I worked and get the opportunities I did. And then, of course, we, even in Iraq, and, we did the invasion. We air landed, did the old, do nosedive the C-17s and reverse the engines. And, we came in and offloaded the trucks. And, frankly, we weren't supposed to hit Aditha. I don't want to say this disparagingly because I don't know who monitors this, who all listens, but our opinion as a staff sergeant and BCO, the consensus was the battalion commander wanted CCO for everything. So, there was a point where BCO was planning to go to Aditha. He was going to pull us out and put CCO in to go hit the dam. And I think that was what he was trying to do, but the mission got, scrapped at the time. So we ended up going out to do line of communication interdiction, which what ACO had been doing for a while. And while we were out, we got a frago and said, hey, you guys go and hit the dam. So little birds came in, landed right there. And we did planning on the hood of a Humvee and drove, to the dam and, got really lucky because, Graham White, he probably listened to this one time. He's current brigade commander out there in Hawaii. He was my PL and Graham got lost and, we did some zigzags and, thank God for the lost PL because we got up to the dam right in the middle of their change of the guard. Apparently they don't have a first general order. So they weren't properly relieved and the next crew came in. So we had very minimal resistance. As soon as we got up onto the hardball, we started gunning it, just kind of, puckered, waiting to get shot. And we see these ZPUs all oriented like directly at us. And I'm like, it's going to be bad. We're in Humvees with no armor and nobody shot. So we finally got onto the main part of the dam. We realized that, they're in the middle of a guard change. So the Lord was definitely looking out for us. And then at that point, they started coming in. So, we had 2 BCO platoons and 1 CCO platoon, which was all ball. I think maybe Donnie, I think it was. And they were all in the same platoon. So we were all fighting our different areas that lasted about, I think we were on the dam 19 days, but the fighting was about 13 days. And it was either 11 or 13. The first 3 days were continuous. I think the third day was nonstop. There was a lot of stats I heard that I kind of eye roll. Some people are like, I'm like, I don't know if we're at the same dam, but the one statistic I heard, which is on that day 3, it was there was a round indirect or direct from, you can't tell except for the whistle, but either a tank, artillery, or mortar round coming in on us. They said on average every 7 seconds or 11 seconds, something like that for an hour. And I believe that's probably right. It was pretty helpless feeling because by then usually some fast movers would come over and start, wrecking shop, and they weren't. Come to find out because they didn't want to break below the cloud deck. So A-10s finally came in and the enemy did a good job. They coordinated their fire maneuver and they were right on, in RPG range, and we were exchanging, for a while, and we were getting flanked, and we're firing javelins and we finally out of nowhere, here comes the A-10s and just start dropping JDAMs, and it really saved our ass. So I've been an A-10 fan my whole life since then. But Sergeant Major Birch was, I didn't know how to take the Sergeant Major because most Sergeant Majors I had were the, Sergeant Major comes around, it's time to check your bootlaces, and is my shit tucked in, and on the fucking shoot house even. And so Birch shows up and as a matter of fact, I had to take a guy, he got a speeding ticket on Bagram back, that Afghan deployment, and the CSM had to sign it. So we had to set up an appointment with the Sergeant Major and go see him. And so he's like, get in here. And I'm like, fuck, here we go. And so he's like, fuck, shut my door. And he's like, got the ticket. He's like, you see this thing? And he's like, Roger Sergeant Major, he's putting on his production. And I didn't realize, like, you see this thing? And he's like, Roger Sergeant Major. He's like, and then he smiles. He's like, take this thing and fucking frame it. You're probably the first Ranger to get a speeding ticket in a combat zone in history. Get the fuck out of here. So that was my first exposure to, a CSM that'll, I don't want to say they had common sense. Plenty of them did, but it was just a different flavor than I was used to. And so he's on the dam with me, and he was like, hey, I'm a weapon squatter. He's like, hey, where do you need me? I'm like, Sergeant Major, I don't. So after I got to get over the uncomfort of trying to tell Sergeant Major to pull security and take a knee, like, he was very helpful. You know, he ran around with a SR-25 with the AK slung on his back from one of the dead dudes he pulled it off of. And you know, matter of fact, we were trying to leapfrog gun trucks as we were clearing through the buildings, and we had this Jenga truck barreling down on us. And this is the one time I got a goose gunner named Carson Stack, who's I believe still Apache pilot, CW4, weirdest dude in the world. Like, you know, not very good at a lot of rangering, but like was a walking arslick manual and was like the man at the goose. And so we're like, dude, here's your time, goose gunner, HE round, freaking, you know. So he fires and he's like 200 meters short. We're like, what the fuck? And so we opened back up, and my turret gunner, I'm sure I'm on his people to kill list, but he was going to his older brother was platoon sergeant Somalia Watson, and he's jacking around with 50 cal, headspace and timing was off. I'm like, dude, fix the shit. So after like a couple of chunks, I'm like, get in the fucking driver's seat. So I hop in and you know, I just max it out in 2 clicks, and it, you know, chunk, and then I do it another click, and then it starts rocking. And so by then I'm you know, shooting the truck, you know, and it's just punching through. I can't see, all these guys are in the back of the Jenga truck. So yeah, later we've seen, you know, a bunch of random body parts and stuff, but the ones that lived come spilling off the you know, the truck, and they're going down in the low ground, and they're trying to come around and flank us. So I'm like, hey man, hey driver, pull the truck over to the guardrail so we can like hit these dudes. And you know, being good ranger, it's like zero pause. He's like, right, sir, and he guns it over there, and I'm not ready. You know, I'm up in the turret. So we whip right over, and I'm like eyeball to eyeball with these dudes, and they're like raising up, and I'm like, like, and so they start hitting the shield, and I had to free gun it. I put the gun in free gun, and I'm just freaking just rocking down there trying to hit the dudes. And right about that time, when I was able to kind of look up, make sure I'm seeing what I'm hitting, I look over, and the guard railing of the dam is like concrete, like, you know, golden arches kind of thing. And as I look over, it was like slow-mo, but there's one of the dudes like coming out from underneath it. He's just like taking aim right at me, and I had no time to react. So I'm just like flinching, like this is going to hurt. And then all of a sudden I see his face explode. He gets shot through the cheek, and he lived. But I'm like, what just, I look over, and Birch just shot him with a sniper rifle, and then just gave me a head nod. So I got you, Ranger buddy, you know. So, very thankful to Birch on that one. But yeah, after that, you know, obviously he lived overseas in Iraq, so we were going after the deck of cards, you know. I think 30 different Saddam Hussein, you know, we were calling them Elvis sightings.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And Birch just wouldn't come. I think he had to be directed to come home because he wouldn't come home. But just hitting targets. The last story I'll say with this, because it's just so funny. With us in the compounds there, us and you know, the unit and the Brits. The Brits were new over there, and they're trying to figure out their footing, and pretty, you know, humble. They weren't scared to say they didn't know something. So we've been operating in that AO for a while now, and they said, hey, this is our, you know, target we generated, but, you know, would you guys be okay with navigating, leading in, because we don't really know the area like you do? Like, yeah, absolutely. So we're doing a half gaff package. Of course, in those days we're syncing, you know, Garmin's, so ETA. So, you know, when the birds are audible, we're set. And so it was the plan was that the Brits were gonna, at the release point, we're gonna whip around in front of us, and they were gonna lead into the target. And I'm like, okay, but why? Like, you just add another complication of this for no reason. And they're like, they wouldn't come off of it. They're just like, we want to do it. It's our mission. It's like, all right, fine. So we're going in. I'm the senior guy on the ground. My PL, because my platoon sergeant got, Graham White got blown up on that trip. So now I got a new PL. Jeff Duncan was my platoon sergeant, but he had some vocal cord issue where he has to get Botox shots in the rest of his life. So I was a platoon sergeant. And so we got a split force, some on half, and with some of the other guys from the unit, and then us on gaff with the Brits. And so right about that time, we call, you know, my lead squad leader says, hey, we're 100 meters from release point. And they hear release point, and they just whip the Land Rovers in front of us and take the next turn, which was the wrong turn. And so we're all stepping on each other, trying to talk about it. And I'm like, just follow them, because I didn't want to get split up. And now we're shooting the enemy between each other, you know. So I'm like, fuck it, we'll be fucked up together. So we're Bajan. We're trying to not miss, you know, the birds coming in. And about that time, you know, we're off-roading. We end up flipping a Humvee, or one of the Humvees flips, and we stop real quick to make sure everybody's okay. You know, we leave the vehicle with it, and we dismount the guns, and we start running the guns through a muddy field, and we are smoked. Like, we make it in time, we get it contained. Birds come in, everything's flawless as far as that goes, but people are throwing up. Birch just freaking looks miserable, you know. And so by then we go back, or they got that Humvee turned over. They bring the vehicles up to us. We load the vehicles. We reset the BPs. And so I'm like, what are these dudes doing? There's a Land Rover parked right here. It's not part of the plan. And Birch was like, he's sitting behind me in the truck. He's like, hey, Navarro, what are these guys doing? I'm like, sorry, I don't know. I was just thinking the same thing. He's like, hey, driver, pull over there and ask him. And so he's like, Roger, Sergeant Major. And so we pull up next to him. I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing here? He's like, what's that? He's like, we're at our bus, mate. I'm like, your what? He's like, we're at our bus, mate. I'm like, your bus? I'm like, does anybody know what the fuck he's saying? And he's like, I'm like, you're at your blocking position? He's like, yeah, mate, our BP. We're at our bus, mate. And I'm like, dude, maybe I'm fucked up. It's been a shitty night. So I'm like taking the light out, looking at the map, and I'm like, nah, man, you guys are on the other side of the objective. Like, and he's like, he looks, map check. He's like, oh yeah, you're right. Cheerio, mate. They drive off, you know, and so Birch says to me, you might have to edit this out, but I think it's all common knowledge now. But he says, hey, Navarro, you know who that is, right? I'm like, you mean the Brits? He's like, that's TF Blue with accents.
Oh shit. That's fucking funny. That's awesome. Man, that was like,
Wow.
I'll tell you what, that was a rapid fire like story, you know, just a series of stories. That was awesome, man. Well done. Well done.
Yeah,
man. That was pretty awesome. There's so much covered there. It's hard to like go, okay, hey, let's like deep dive into one thing. But you know, let's just take a general approach, I suppose. You know, so you talk about like Sergeant Major Birch, you know, you've highlighted a couple other leaders, you know, Ranger greats you've served with. You know, what's some other leaders, or maybe even like, you know, kind of moments you realize that you think were extremely pivotal? Because, and the reason I wanted to highlight this is you talk about Birch, and I can say, you know, and I only went on, I think, on like a 3-day mission with Birch, you know, and that was when he was a regimental sergeant major. And I think it was Spring Surge. It was one of the Spring Surges, you know, and he rode on a Humvee. And I just remember, you know, I was yelling at a gunner, and, you know, my terror gunner, and he just like looked at me. He's like, you think he can hear you right now? Like, you might like, what, you know, like he's firing a 50 cal, you know. But anyway, my point is, you know, when I was a CSM, you know, and him challenging things, and, you know, like his email, like, hey, I know plenty of professionals that had beards, you know, and have long hair. Like, you know, this is not a defining point, you know, our defining point to Ranger Regiment, and it sure in the hell is not what dignifies, you know, discipline or anything else. But my point is, you know, like some other like Ranger leaders that you think, you know, that you would like to talk about that really kind of contribute to your development as a leader.
Yeah. I mean, of course, like, you know, and I know you all get this. It's like you're almost afraid to do it because there's surely you're going to leave some folks out. But
I mean, it's going to happen, you know.
I spoke of Rob Nichols. You know, Rob was, I loved Rob because, and still do, because, you know, he was an NCO that made sure you didn't marginalize yourself as an NCO, meaning you're not just a dumb NCO. Like, and he wasn't like, you know, hey, I watched an era, I know we all did, but there was an era where it's like, we don't need PLs. Like, we can do your job without you. And he taught me the opposite. He's like, if your PL fails, you failed. You know, you're the platoon sergeant. That guy's going to be a general officer one day and mentor that guy, you know, and so I absolutely did, you know, and I had one PL get fired as a line platoon sergeant. And, you know, I won't get into all that. I think he was one of those guys that just wouldn't listen. I asked all his PL peers to help talk to him, and they said he just won't listen either. So I don't feel like I failed him per se, but I did feel like a failure. But Nichols raised me that way. You know, he challenged us to be academic. He quizzed us on a lot of stuff. And, as a matter of fact, I listened to old officer that was in the RS8, Heath McCormick. I think he's a colonel right now. And he's telling me a story one time up at Regiment. And he's like, yeah, I remember this one NCO, like, that was my first exposure to the Rangers. And he's like, he came out and taught machine gun class to my bullet class. And it's like, the guy was so articulate but he just was like the most knowledgeable NCO I'd ever seen, and he's like, his name was Rob Nichols. And I'm like, yeah, yep. But, so, I mean, he could do both. And Tony Keller once said, when Keller was a PL, he's like, man, I just feel like such a shitbag every day for certain, because you're such a better officer than I am. And some people would take that obviously as a stab, but he was meaning it in the best way, because he could do his job and anybody's job. So I always aspired to be a lot like Rob, because of that. He was a guy that he never had to yell at you. He just give you the look and shake his head, and you just want to go off yourself because you let him down. And I always said, if I could be 10% of that as a leader, that I would consider myself a success, because we all know that, the asshole Ranger NCO only gets you so far.
Right.
The truth, I don't want to disappoint is clearly the way to go. So guys like him I was fortunate to get to serve under in a few instances, and I've made a point to try to keep up with and let them know how I'm doing, success or failure. And then, I'll throw one officer out just because he always comes up in my head. But I think General Hodney was, the best battalion commander I had. He was my commander out of 275 as a first sergeant. And his story, I believe, his father was injured in a parachute accident as a PFC. And so, General Hodney's, his goal was just to make his dad proud and, surpass his father, what he did in the Army, and was able to do that pretty quick. So everything after that was kind of gravy. And honestly, that was kind of the way I went to the Army. It's like, man, I probably should have been fired 3 ranks ago, but apparently I'm cool enough people. So I'm just happy to be here at this point, and to hear a commander say that same thing was awesome, because I know he actually led that way. I think there's probably a lot of things he did that didn't help him on getting the RCO job, but he did it for the right reasons. 275 was burn the kettle at both ends. We had, several suicides, had a tough rank, from deployments to just, demanding leaders. And Hodney came in and said, hey, I'm going to provide some balance. And it wasn't 4-day weekends and go do, hang out. We were working hard, but it was great. He pulled the first sergeants in, which I appreciate, but he pulled the first sergeants in before the commanders and try to get the pulse of the organization and ask what the impacts are. If we let this party continue at the Hell Farewell and zonk the battalion tomorrow, and we're like, sure, like done, but he truly tried to, hey, we can't do it all. So what do we really need to focus on, and where can we give to get a little bit back to the boys? And so for that, I got a few Hodney sayings, which I love, but he told me, one time he's like, I came to the regiment as a major. So, I didn't have any experiences prior to that. So I talked to guys that wanted to come to the Rangers when I was a commander in the conventional Army. And I'd tell him, he's like, hey guys, it's not like some mythical, beast. It's just what you thought you were going to do when you joined the Army, and I think that's just the best way to say it. It's like 100%, like, just be good with, master of the basics, good with your hands and weapons, do PT, all the foundational stuff that unfortunately isn't very routine in the conventional Army. And that's not always because they don't want it to be. It's because they're, I'll tell you firsthand, 82nd in any day in the week has got a battalion's worth of people on detail. And that's not even doing some major exercise. That's just every day. So, it's hard. It's hard for them. So, we're fortunate in the regiment to get to just train, and you don't see that until you go get a taste of it. I always believe people, they say you got it good here. And I'm like, I don't want to have to go learn that. I believe you. So I try to stay. But when I got to go see it, I'm like, yeah, I totally understand. And, the other thing Hodney said is, which I thought was funny. He said, man, he said, I'm on a mid-rotator flight going back, and, I'm not with my unit. I'm just with random people in 15-month deployment. And he's like, I'm looking around the plane. And I'm like, man, like the Army is a collectively unimpressive looking group of people. And, and it's so funny because, I mean, he's not wrong. There's walks of life. And I don't mean, obviously, race, sheep, creed or whatever, but there's people that are way too fat. There's people that, and it's just like, man,
Yep.
we're very hypercritical being Rangers. And so it's like, some of these people, you're like, dude, if I was a foreign country, I'd invade tomorrow if I seen 5 of you, and
Yeah.
so, I think he was a guy that, there was a few things he did that I didn't necessarily agree with, which I won't get into because it'll come off across as the wrong way. But I think he really did a lot to mentor and take care of us, and hold us accountable. And then I would say, Josh Mitchell, who died probably my second year as retired. Sergeant Major Mitchell jumped into Grenada, jumped into Panama, was a 175 guy until he got to third, but 2 combat jumps in the 90s. He reminded me of Blade. He had the same exact, demeanor, just like nose up in the air. Like he talked to me out of the corner of his eye with his hands like this. And he's like, Navarro, come here. He'd be like, hey, bud. And he'd come and do my walks with me while I'm on CQ. And asked me, one day he asked me, he's like, hey, well, what do we need to fix in BCO? And I said, I'm a damn corporal. I said, nothing for sure. And he's like, no, you're not getting off that easy. Give me a couple. And I said, well, for sure, I think, you keep too many shitbags around. You give people too many chances. And he gave me his reason why. I still don't necessarily agree with it, but he explained himself. And then he's like, what else you got? I said, well, you're always late to formation. He's like, motherfucker, it's my formation. I'm like, I know it's you in the commander's formation.
You can't be late to your formation. Yeah.
I'm like, the time you put out, we're all sitting out there waiting for, 5, 10, 15 minutes. And he's like, no, I got it. Your time's important too. He's like, contrary to belief, I'm not in there just, telling war stories. We're handling stuff, but I can do that. You're right. So he comes out Monday morning and, we call it ease. And he's like, hey, Navarro, am I good? I make it. Navarro said I've been late too much. So I want to make sure, of course, my platoon's motherfucker, So he kind of fucked me on that one, but a great mentor. Wasn't too important or too busy to, be out there on the perimeter talking to you and, whether it's asking what's fucked up or just giving you advice or telling you from his lens after, I think at that time, 18 years in the Army. And so, any leader that took the time to get to know me, that invested in me, I tried to take some of the things I learned from regiment as conventional Army, 3 ups, 3 downs, try to make sure, like anything else, if you half-ass it and don't see it through, it's going to become just to check the block. So I took it very serious and, followed up to every comment that was made, even if it was, hey, I hear you, but I don't agree. At least I gave, a response, or here's why we do what we're doing. So, I learned so many things from so many influential leaders, of course, all my peers, guys, yourselves that, that's what's hard in the regiment is like, you're just another dude that's trying to, survive. And so, and I don't say that there's a million rock stars in the conventional Army without a doubt. There's plenty of guys. It's like, man, that guy put a scroll on him right now. You never know the difference. But there's so many that aren't. So I hate to say this, but I feel almost like, you're set up to succeed in the Ranger Regiment because you're surrounded by talent. You have officers that most of them had either gone to an Ivy League school or at least got to in a Downing scholarship or something. You have NCOs that, obviously were multi-volunteers, but also like strove for success and they had that little extra edge. So, it's the iron sharpens iron. And so I think, who knows where the hell I'd have been if I wasn't blessed to get that opportunity to come here and at least ran fast enough from the cops to stay here. And so, I'm fortunate, when I went to retire, I got a smooth board packet invite and I got one when I first left to go to the 82nd. And, they need, I think, 5 names per person is what the goal is to make it a fair board. So I knew I was a throwaway name. I hadn't even left the regiment. So I said, yeah, put my name in there. Of course, I'll be one of the sacrificial lambs. And so they did the board. Bishop was kind enough to call me and tell me that I didn't get selected. And, for what it's worth, you're on our list and kind of thing. And I'm like, no, I really appreciate it. I said, honestly, I wasn't even expecting it. Honestly, I got to deploy with the 82nd. If I would have came back to the regiment at that point, it'd be like the opposite of the charter. So, it's all good. But then the next list comes out and it was right before I made the brigade list, as a matter of fact, or the next smooth board invite. And I declined it because I knew I was retiring. And so they were forward. So Bishop said, "Hey man, you got time for lunch?" So I ate, and then he asked me to go see Tegmeyer, and Tegmeyer was like, "Hey, for what it's worth, I mean, we're not the president's board and stuff, but you're we got a Ranger on the board this year, and you got a high likelihood." And I said, "No, I'm honored, sir, and I know you're running damn task force over here, and I really appreciate you even taking the time to talk to me, but I want to go out of the regiment." I was able to survive for 19 plus years without getting RFS, and I want to keep it that way. So I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. So
yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. One thing that we would have never admitted at the time, for the most part, there was probably cases of it, but was that peer-to-peer mentorship. Like when you're sitting in a meeting, and I will, I'm a master sergeant, you're a first sergeant, up at 275, sitting in meetings, you would say things, there's other first sergeants too. And you don't say anything, but you're like, fuck, that's a really good point. That's a really good idea. And you like write it down, but you would never say at the time, "Hey man, like that was awesome. Like I'm totally going to steal that idea," just because of like how competitive we were. But man, that peer-to-peer mentorship, like I think you hit the nail on the head when you said like, that's why I survived. Like, but at the same time, it was the least spoken thing. Like, you never ever said it, because you didn't want to give that first sergeant that upper hand and think he had something on you.
yeah. No, I mean, and that's, so the one time, just because I felt so guilty. So probably the most talented NCO that I've worked with, and of course I'm biased, but just a natural leader was guy Brian Strait. Brian, like he was technically my platoon sergeant at RIP. He was 2 years senior to me. He was at E6P while I was E6. Then he pinned E7. I became promotable shortly after, but nonetheless, like rank irrelevant. Like the guy would come in at 3 a.m. and he's firing all cylinders every time, almost out of memory, like never missed a beat. And I'm like, man, this guy is impressive. He's hard to keep up with. And so Brian had a, fast forward, and I'm getting, an opportunity to get slated for a company, and Brian was going to get out of the Army, and then at the last minute had a change of heart. So he kind of, it caused him to get passed over. And so I told Sergeant Major Hardy, I said, "Hey, for what it's worth," and maybe might have been passed from the seat, so I don't remember, but I said, just my 2 cents. I said, I want to be a first sergeant, quite a bit. Platoon sergeant was the job I dreamed of, but first sergeant, I'm excited. So I'm not saying this because I don't want to do the job, but if it means me not getting a company to get Brian Strait a first sergeant job, I would say give mine up because he's that good, and I would feel guilty every day leading Rangers when a guy like him is not, because of that, so
Yeah.
of course he's like, "Hey, no, we already got a plan for Strait, no worries," but and honestly, I've never met, I think Pat Snett, when Pat and I were command team at RSTC, he's like, Evans asked him, he's like, "What was your biggest challenge as a company commander?" They're 375, and he said, accepting the fact that my first sergeant is a better commander than me. And that,
Wow.
I think is true. I mean, he's that good. I mean, the officers, the NCOs, everybody around him is like that guy is the guy I go to for mentorship. He's not going to sugarcoat. He's not going to spend a lot of time bullshitting, but he's to the point, and he's genuine, and he's going to take care of people. You'll probably never get him on this podcast because he's too humble, which is why, sometimes I think, obviously I'm honored, appreciate you letting me gab for a few minutes to at least maybe share a few funny stories about our comrades, and maybe one little inkling for a young Ranger. But guys like Brian, if you could twist his arm to pull him into something like this, it'd be great. Cause I mean, that's a guy, he'd have been limitless if he chose to. He knew it was time to put the family first, and he did. And for that, I totally get it. We all do. But yeah, there's so many like him, I'm sure out there. But Brian, a peer mentor, that was a guy that I as a matter of fact, I wasn't going to compete for CSM or for Sergeant Major. I said, "Hey, what do you think?" He's like, "I think you should do it." He said, "You're 2 years, you went right into a company, you're ahead of the game. You're not going to wait 6 years to retire. So in your shoes, I would compete at least once. And I did, only because his advice. So, I respect anything the guy's ever said. He's always lived the Ranger creed, and like just a guy that, that we all know one, but one of those guys that's like, man, I hope I at least fake it half as good as he does on the worst day,
Yeah. I appreciate all Jesse, and maybe that's something we should look at doing, Clay, is every episode we have whoever's on, recommend somebody.
Yeah,
somebody, like nominate somebody else, for something. Yeah, that's a good idea. Well,
on my list that I hadn't
right.
put on them. Yeah, I feel exactly the same about Brian. I didn't get to work as directly with Brian as Jesse did, but I mean, as we were first sergeants at the same time. He was down at M5, and he was just one of those guys that, that's what I enjoyed about being at the RSTB. You could interact with all the rifle battalion first sergeants when I was a first sergeant, and you did, because all of my guys were supporting them. And then Brian and I actually worked together again for Sergeant Major Pallister in ROTC World. Brian had Columbus State when I was at LSU. So, and Brian ran all the airborne programs for all the cadets going to airborne school for like the whole entire ROTC command. So he called me and tell me about pulling all his hair out of his head, and the cadets, whatnot. Yeah, my guys do it well. RFS, I'm sending them back, but back and forth. But now I appreciate that. It's a tribute to your humility, Jesse. I think that is one trend that I see across us as peers. As we policed each other, we were still, as NCOs and Rangers alike, subordinates. Everyone takes the time to shine some light on the guy to the left and the right of them. Because we know we didn't get there by ourselves, and I'm not surprised that you've highlighted some more legends. When you go back and you look at that word legend, I told Mike the same thing. I said, hey man, you called the wrong guy, man. I don't deserve to be on this podcast. And then a couple months down the road, he's asking me to help host it, and I'm like, wow,
that's
man.
not quite how that story went. I said I needed some help, and I got one. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Don't let him undersell you, Jesse. He was being the awesome Ranger buddy that he is.
Yeah, and no doubt. I just, going back, got one. We talked about it, but bringing it back like full circle, you highlighted so many what, in my opinion, meet the textbook definition of a legend. I mean, because legend in the English dictionary, I'm not trying to be a professor here, but it's about legacy. It coalesced with that, and a legacy is having an impact on someone, something, or an organization. And as we continue to move forward, I mean, you've had a tremendous impact, as you shared over the last 90 minutes or so. And that being said, I'm not done asking you questions, because I know some of the other things you had, and I don't want to be cliche here, but on the highs and the lows, best day in the Ranger Regiment, worst day in the Ranger Regiment, and I'll let you figure out the middle, just to kind of base you up there. And if you could share that with us, we'd obviously be appreciative, and I'll continue to take more notes, man, as I did as a peer of yours for a very long time.
Yeah. The worst day is easier to, of course, come by, and I can't just say one, and I don't want to be cliche, but I think anybody that, I mean, we've lost so many Rangers that, it's everybody's been affected, but I would say there's a tie for worst days. Any direct casualties that we took, it's just difficult. I would say losing Horns, Ashley White, and Domey was the toughest for me, because that was the only time, and of all the casualties that I was a part of, involved with on target or evac or whatever, that I saw, any other time the birds wheels up, and then not to make this sound horrible, but somebody else is dealing with everything else. And so in this case, they come back to Kandahar, and we had to go over and go through their pockets and get all the pocket litter out and all the, sterilize them. They had GRGs and you name it. And so, just awful, process. We had to go into the hospital. We had six litter patients and 3 were doing CPR. And the hospital just had a complete shutdown when it, a lot of pretty gruesome scene, leave it at that. But when the hospital OIC, of course, they got the B team on because it's Kandahar at night. Nobody else is doing missions except for soft. So as soon as they seen Ashley White come in, this female 06, she just completely shuts down and is non-functional. So in true Ranger fashion, all the Ranger medics take over the hospital and are running everything. And so when we finally called, stopped doing compressions on our KIAs and, called them, that whole process after the fact, like, now what? We're going through ISO prep, we're getting, rings off of them and all that stuff. And just a horrible process that I couldn't imagine being the folks at Dover or the folks. These are our brothers and sisters though, so it's that much worse. But that was something I've always felt like I've never wired. I guess that can be a good or a bad thing, but I was raised, my dad was pretty tough on me. So I don't, my wife would say I have, she calls me Dexter. She's like, you like pretend to have emotions at like functions. But in all seriousness, like I've always come across as very callous. I think because of the way I was raised. And so things fortunate for combat is like, I can compartmentalize, but with that particular thing, I felt like I did too, but there was a lot of times where I just couldn't kick it, and my wife at one point back at Fort Lewis was like, I'm afraid, like, is this the new you? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm like, and of course it just compounds the problem. Cause it's like, what the hell am I doing? What, like, I'm here, like we're at this, we're at the zoo. Like what's the problem? And I'm just getting more and more pissed because she keeps bringing it up and keeps making a thing of it. And I'm like, I don't see the problem. I'm like, I'm not doing anything. What am I doing? Yeah, you're distant. You're just going through the motions. You're not laughing. You're not smiling. You're not. And I don't see it. I'm like, so I try to pretend and try to go above and beyond to try to show her. And it wasn't, and over time, talk to people and got, and time heals. And it's obviously stuff that's always going to stay with you. But I think that was the worst. All of them were horrible. If you've ever been to listen to bagpipes, especially in theater, and you didn't leave teary eyed, you probably got something wrong with you, so, but that was the hardest for sure. And then, I think, the best day is, so I would say probably as cliche as this is probably just graduating Ranger school. I looked at the Ranger qualified folks as like this, unicorns that I'd never aspired, I'd never make it there. And so, and there were so few of them, as I said before, when I got there that, I was like, man, hopefully I make my way through this enough and get a tab. And, and I did. And I was like, man, I think they messed this up, but I'll take it, and so, so, a million, positives coming off target, to this day, if I hear Chinooks flying over Fort Benning where I'm close to, or, when I was retired outside of, Carthage here, I still get this, not to get corny, but like a real flashback, but I get this feeling, this warm feeling over me because, it's like Pavlov's dog. You're the helo blades and that shitty night is over and it's time to catch a ride home, it's like it's funny how that still kind of gives me a warm feeling inside. But yeah, those are the most, again, not to be cliche, but the most notable times that hopefully I didn't overshare there. I don't want to set any families, but it was a tough time for all of us.
No, I appreciate your transparency, and you sharing about that. I know it's tough. It's, definitely, it's difficult to talk about those times. But there's, the thing I've learned, Jesse, is through podcasts, and a lot of the feedback I get. Sometimes I'm careful about, sharing it, because it's not always easy thing to do. anonymously, like, hey, somebody, some of the feedback that, we get from people, because, there's specific things that they would say that would kind of cue it off. And I don't want to ever compromise that trust. But hearing from other people about similar, because there was other Rangers with you there. There was other Rangers that were impacted by it, and to hear you talk about how it affected you, the struggle and everything else helps. It's almost therapeutic in the terms of they realize they're not alone, because we all have the tendency to kind of think, well, I'm the only one that feels that way, or I'm the only one that's struggling with that, or I'm the only one that's like really getting my head. And the truth is no. I will say that sometimes time is a factor. It affects people at different times. Like, I mean, sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it's the same day. It's different for everybody. That's the part that, is not very well defined. And for some of us, it does take a lot. Uh, it takes a long time, for us to do that, because we're just so many fast paced things and so many things that we were doing, So anyway, I really appreciate you sharing that, and, talking about the good times too. And it's funny when you were talking about the helicopters, I couldn't help it, but the cadence just like came in my head. And I'm not a cadence guy by like any means, but it makes you like wonder who wrote cadence. And maybe it was actually retired guys, like, I hear the choppers coming, they're flying, but man, the same thing too. Like, anytime I hear a plane or like a helicopter that's low flying, like instantly I'm like looking at it and I'm trying to like identify it, and then if it's any kind of military variants, I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, man. Yeah.
It's been, it's like that emotional safety tether.
Yeah.
I'll still walk out of my house when they fly over where I'm at, Panhandle, and I'll see the Chinooks flying, and more than likely it's a hungry Ranger student. They're making their turns to go hit Santa Rosa Island or whatever they're up to. But I agree that that's a powerful moment to share with us, Jesse. And we appreciate your humility and your vulnerability, to not only share with us, your Ranger buddies, but to some folks that are going to appreciate you sharing that across the community.
Yeah. And I think, there, I wish there was a forum for folks to not even like, some of it's just, okay, obvious. It's do this, do that, talk to people, but obviously, not being alone is part of it, but even methods, and I say that because I set up at 275, we're using the military life, family consultant, whatever they call them, inflict. And, and they would tell us how our people are doing. And then one day the guy's like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm all right. And he kind of pried for a while. And then I'm like, I get some irritability. And he's like, go for a run, hit a punching bag. And, I'm like, come on, dude. Like, I haven't tried that.
Come on.
And so I go to Benning to RSTC first sergeant, and I talk to them, same exact stuff. And I bring it up and I get the same exact response, which I kind of laugh, like, you guys are reading out of the same manual. And so it wasn't until I was retiring and I had to go through the process. So I chose my psychologist at 1st Brigade 82nd was Maureen Mulholland, General Mulholland's daughter. And so she wanted me to link up with a psychologist friend of hers that was a psych at the unit. And so she comes over for one of my meetings and she's like, hey, I think what you need to do is just the opposite. She's like, and don't take this like all corny, like you're over there with a loaded gun, like on patrol. She's like, but with this many deployments, like whether you mean to or not, you're always switched on for going into battle, whether you got to fight or nothing comes of it. You do that, for that many years, you've kind of rewired yourself. You're always kind of in a fight or flight, not like you're ready to shoot it out, but just kind of your body's switched on, and I never really thought about that. And so she's like, you need to do the opposite. When you start getting tuned up, like do yoga, do things calm, like remove all the distractors from the room. And honestly, that's the only thing that's worked. The Army wanted to put me on 11 medicines when I retired. And yeah, they mask stuff, but then they cause another problem. So they give you medicine for that. Next thing you know, you're on 15 different meds, and a buddy of mine right now that just retired, it's an 05, is really struggling. And they did the same thing with him. And I'm convinced it's because they got him on 15 meds and he's also drinking with those meds and he's not doing well right now, doesn't see his Army career ending the way it did. And I'm like, hey, newsflash, it's the same way for all of us, like, and obviously I'm not being a smart ass. It's just reality, like the train keeps moving. And so I think, having that conversation with folks, I've had to learn it through experience, and I'd rather learn it from somebody else's. I kind of had to just, stumble my way through it. Thank God. I say this not despairingly, but thank God I don't deal with depression, because the only time that I've ever experienced depression, and I have a close family member, which I won't air, but has depression, and I'm like, I don't get it. Just snap out, like, quit. What do you have to be sad? You live in America, freaking, like you got food, like, and I never got it. I'm like cheer the F up, and while I was deployed as a CSM, and they're giving me a tramadol for my knee, because I just got a procedure done on my knee, and I left it as I go back out to Fob Geronimo, who are out in gunfights, and I remember sitting there thinking, like, almost like an addiction. Oh, I mean, sort of was. I'm like, I need my medicine, and it was like I could tell that it was like a chemical addiction or a mental addiction and needing this stuff. I was like trying to think of reasons to go back just so I could get this medicine, which was completely retarded, and I knew it in my head. And I'm like, dude, like, you're getting addicted to this stuff. So I'm like, okay, now I'm not going to go get it, and I'm not going to take it ever again. So I just cold turkeyed it. But there was about a week where I was just like depressed, and like it's like one of those, there's nothing wrong, but you can't help it. It's like, I know I shouldn't feel this way. There's literally nothing wrong, but I'm like, can't kick this like feeling of never the impending doom. And that was the first and only time I've ever experienced depression. And I'm like, man, that is awful. Like, I don't wish that for anybody, because it's like you can't do anything about, you feel like you can't do anything about it. So if you couple that with like some of the struggles that we deal with getting out, I can only imagine what recipe that can create. So, we just got to stick together. I mean, Clay, I bring this up in here, of all the friends I've, and I don't mean this negative against anybody out there, but parents were going through some, married for my whole life, almost going through divorce, out of nowhere, kind of hit me. And, my wife's just like, doesn't seem like you care, because I don't talk about it. I don't share my emotions. But I was kind of explaining to Clay, and reached out a couple different times, just checking on me. And I can tell you, like, my entire adult life, I don't know how many people have checked on me, but probably, maybe one other, and I'm sorry if I don't remember you, but so it just meant a lot to me, because I would never ask for it, and I often don't even try to let people know if something's bothering me. But the fact that Clay cued on the indicators and was nice enough and cared enough to check on me a couple of times, more than and I say this like, I wasn't that bad off, so it wasn't that like it kept me off the ledge, but I just felt cared about, appreciated, or I appreciated that. So I want to publicly thank you on this, and then also say, like, even though it may seem like just such a pointless gesture to folks, like, it meant a lot to me, and I'm sure it'll mean a lot to others. May make the difference. So, not to be so cliche, but I think it's very important. Like, after that, I got to the point where I'm like reaching out to folks that I hadn't talked to in a while, just to like say hey, and see if they're doing okay. So
I think as we get older, like, we get to do cliches. I'm just gonna, like, we need to like normalize that. Like, we need to make that like, hey, that's like an old guy right at this point. And I'm sorry, gentlemen, I hate to break the news to you. We're now the old guys. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, look at our beards, especially Clay's. Just
Yeah.
saying, that's a lot of fucking gray Clay. I'm just
I'm about to
saying.
wash that gray right out of my face.
Yeah, right. But like the cliches, like, they really just ring so true, and there's just so much fact in them. But more importantly, there's a lot of wisdom in them, and what you're talking about, what you're saying, it, I mean, Jess, Clay, you guys served, up until recently, the things the Army's trying to do to curb, a lot of the mental health issues, a lot of the suicidal issues and everything else, and the stuff going on with veterans and what they're trying to do. There's probably better answers. I'm sure eventually we'll figure it all out, but the best at the end of the day that an individual can do is just make a concerted effort to continuously reach out to people, especially the people that, just, don't have a lot of people, that they're talking to. They don't have tie to the community, whatever it is, and just check on them and ask hard questions, like, hey, how are you really, really doing? Especially like, literally, right before we sat down, I was just, kind of thinking about an individual, and I was like, man, I really haven't seen, too much from him in a while. And, so reach out to him, and just kind of seeing how he's going. And he's like, man, he's couch surfing his sons, he's having to figure out stuff with his sons because he's in between work right now and everything else. I'm like, perfect. Like, not his situation, no, that situation is not good, but like, okay, good. Now, hey, let's sit down, let's chat tomorrow, let's figure out what's going on. And, just, it goes back into the same thing. Like, people think they're in silos and they're, no one's going to care about their problems, and I've said it, I don't know how many times on Legends of 75th. If you're a Ranger, I care about you. I don't care if you were even RFS after like a year. I care about you. We share the same bloodline. Like, reach out to me, reach out to Clay, reach out to Jesse. Tell us what you need. Tell us what you're struggling with. If we can't be of immediate service for whatever different kind of reason, we will work tirelessly. I know these two gentlemen very well. One that I replaced, and often I would hear about Jesse Navarro's stories as a first sergeant, how 4 o'clock in the morning, he's, freaking in a Ranger's house, helping him deal with a situation because, he was the best guy for it. But more importantly, he was the guy that was, going to be there to help guys, like that. These two individuals, and myself included, not trying to hold myself to the same caliber as them. Like, we want to help and we're going to help, but if, and it's just like being a senior leader in the Army. If I don't know what's going on, I can't, there's nothing I can do to fix it, so you got to communicate works both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I work currently in a company that is about 60% vets, and most of those are soft, and of those, most are Rangers. And I tell you, having seen this for almost 4.5 years, I'm one of 3 hiring managers. I interview hundreds of people. We're very selective. We're able to be at this point as a small business. I think I got there as employee number 30. We're at about 185, and the reality is, like, in some cases, because those same problems that we're talking about are guys I work with now, and as they're struggling through stuff, we try to somewhat handle it with kid gloves. And what I learned was, some of them are like, hey man, they need you got to go back to, a little bit Army and say, hey man, like, pull your head out of your ass and like fix it, and like some folks just need some tough love. Like, they kind of snap back into, I hate to say it, but Ranger mode and say, yep, I'm fucked up. Like, and they'll take the step to get, might need help, but to get fixed. One guy I worked with that, quit drinking a year ago about it, lost a bunch of weight, like doing great. There's a lot of tap dancing around the topic for quite a while. And finally it's like, dude, you were effed up. And it was more than one. Tim Simpson works with me too. Tim talking to folks, and it's like, hey, and honestly, I think us, myself included, like, I would struggle a lot more after retirement if I didn't work with a bunch of old Rangers, if we didn't kind of treat it a lot like we're still in battalion, to be honest, try to change a lot to not make it, I mean, it is a civilian, but there's some good in it, and there's some camaraderie, and there's, we still have that same esprit de corps. We still, call each other shitbags if we're slacking on something, and, so my transition's been a lot easier because of that. So I'm fortunate. A lot of people aren't, they go in a different direction, go back to hometown USA or whatever. So those are really the folks, I think, that need us, because they don't have that, like we're fortunate to have.
Couldn't agree more, Jesse. And, going back to, a couple of weeks ago or a month or so ago when we were doing that, we always been great friends. And I'm just, reflecting back on how much time we spent together. And I mean, obviously you did the same exact thing for me last year. I mean, you're tracking my challenges that I had. I don't make this about me, but like, I mean, tell you, like, a simple note from you and other Ranger buddies, like, helped me realize the value in my obligation to continue to live the creed, to take most would consider tragedy and turn it into triumph, and I think as we continue to do that, nothing feels better when you're stacked up on a door and you got freaking, left non-firing hands squeezing you on the shoulder, and to Mike's point, saying you got one, And I think that we can continue to do that. And that's some of the things when, when Mike and I were talking is we want to have these conversations and just be vulnerable enough to say, hey, we made it. And I think we're more vulnerable, or we're more at risk now as guys who've done this for years and years and years. And when you look back to our generation, and it's not to give ourselves a pat on the butt or the back, is that the nation's never asked so much of their military during our generation when you look at years of service. And what I mean by that is the compelling effects of continuous combat. And I would assess both of you gentlemen as well. Like, we were probably the guys who just compartmentalized it, because I share that with you and we've had conversations. But at the end of it, when we take the uniform off and it gets a little quieter, we start thinking about all the things that we kept ourselves busy with. And that's through my own pilgrimage of like learning how to off ramp that and how to be a little better balanced. Because I still find myself chasing the next shiny object, as my wife tells me. She said, if you were a bass, you'd be caught all the time. Because I'll hit it like, and it's just activity. Because I learned at a very young age that activity numbed and dulled grief for me. And it's kind of fun in that. I think it's great because the more folks we get to talking about it, I think that we're going to have breakouts outside of this digital team room here, because that's, in my opinion, is what we're creating here, is a digital team room to have the same conversations we have after a 12-mile ruck and, hey, let's go get chow.
Right.
It's your morning as a civilian. I was up at 4 o'clock and knocked it out at 7 o'clock. I'm showered, I'm cleaned up, and I got an hour and a half to go drink coffee and make fun of you for being slower than me, whatever the case may be. But no, thanks for sharing that, man. I appreciate it, because I value you as a friend and a brother to the nines. I mean, heck, all that time together, both as in uniform and out. And I tremendously miss working with you on the outside. I found a new vein that I'm running now, but who knows? I'd always welcome that opportunity again, man.
I think, Glenn, you may disagree, but I think as we wrap this up, like, just advice from, four and some change out of the Army. A lot of people try to do anything but what they did for 20-some years, or however long you did it. And a lot of us end up navigating our way back to somewhere that's at least in the same space. And I don't mean even necessarily supporting government, but leading and, what have you. So, I would say just, find something in that aligns, because if you think that you're going to be happy, look at Sergeant Major Birch. Hey, I want to be a welder. They look at his resume and they're like, fuck, no, you're way too qualified to just be a line guy in the well. We're going to put you in management. He's like, nope. And it didn't last because it's not as, not wired that way. And I think, most people, I don't remember what the statistic is, but several jobs in the first couple of years. And, and I think that's a lot of the reason, because success is to do anything but. And it's like, don't fight it. Do what you're good at. Do what you enjoy. If you don't enjoy that stuff, of course. But I would say also, it's like, if you're, I almost hate the term like having work-life balance, because anybody I knew that was a high performer never had it.
Yeah.
It's like, so I kind of eye roll every time I hear it. And I think it's one of those things that, like, if it's not the senior person looking out for the junior person, if you will, there's no way to kick that off. And what I mean by that is, like, I'm a executive leader team member, and my C-suite above me this Christmas, they all like literally took time off. And so even though I only took 3 days off of work, I get back to work to start doing stuff, but I can't collaborate with anybody because they're all off. So I ended up just signing on a PTO and taking more time off. My wife's like, this is crazy. You've been retired for 4 years, and this is the most time I ever had with you. And it was only because the people above me said, I'm not working with you right now because we're going to take time off, And so if you think you're going to do it on your own, you're probably not. You're going to find more shit to do and more busy work, because that's how we're wired. Like, we see there's problems we want to, whether we're effective is irrelevant, but there's things that we think that we need to roll up our sleeves on, and we do. And so again, I'm going to go, I'll go take a job at Home Depot and then it won't matter. No, you'll be miserable. So go find the job that you find purpose in, and do it. But if you don't replace the busy work with something, meaningful, and that's the thing that I've learned in the civilian world is like, people are like, you almost want to like throat check them because they're like, am I getting paid for this? And you're like, why would you, like, that's not service, And then it's like, dude, that's the rest of the world. They're like, if I'm not getting paid for it, I'm going, this is a job, So it's still hard for people like myself and plenty of others to stomach because of the way we're wired. But in reality, it's such the norm that it's like, all right, cool. Yeah, I guess you're right. I'll clock out and like, babe. And it's like being married all over again because you're trying to figure out like what to do as a hobby with your partner because you've never had to do that because you don't have enough time to. So I would tell you, it's been a very different experience trying to navigate that post life. And so, again, I just share it because I think it's stuff that everybody faces.
I think you're right on, Jesse. I agree with everything you said. I think you got to find something meaningful and purposeful to do if you're wired like we are. And there's folks that are wired like us, obviously in the community, but even outside the community, it's like, how do you bring everything full spectrum? Are you doing something meaningful and purposeful? Are you being able to spend time with those that you love and care about, family, friends, neighbors, etc.? And do you feel rewarded at the end of the day? And like some of the most meaningful time I found was when I left the position based upon a natural disaster to go help my family, which spiraled off to 6 months of volunteer work. And I basically had to make a very conscious decision to, like, all right, I've done enough. It's time to come back home and reset things. But it just goes back to that meaning and purpose. And I couldn't agree with you more and echo your comments to the audience today that might potentially be questioning the fact, hey, am I doing the right thing? If you're doing what you love, you never worked a day in your life. I firmly believe in that. I don't know who said it, but it's pretty accurate. And if you're not, then I guess we got more options now that we're on this side of the retirement side from the Army, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think lastly, Clay, and I know you do very well in a lot of your different endeavors. And I don't necessarily believe like, well, I do, but I believe money doesn't buy happiness. My wife would be the first to tell you that. I make significantly more money than I did in the civilian sector. And I'm more pissed than I am a lot of times because I'm in management and I'm dealing with a lot of shit. I do believe that there's, and I don't know what it is with inflation now, but at one point it was $60,000 for a U.S. family to be like where money is no longer a factor. That's a proven fact.
Yeah.
So I will say though, like me and my wife don't have to save as much to take a vacation. We don't have to, so I enjoy like making a good income. I watched my parents not, and it was something that has always been a thing for me. And so I don't want to struggle like they did. And not that they didn't struggle. My dad took a different approach. He watched his dad work himself to death. So he said he's not going to do it. His dad was an immigrant. And so my dad said, I'm going to work to live, not live to work. And so, I had the, knockoff brand of everything and that. And I always used to get bitter because I'm like, Dad, why, you can make more money. Why don't you? I'm the dork at school, but it taught me, I got a job when I was 13 and started making cash. And so it's the yin and yang to everything we do. And so I say, I don't think there's anything wrong with setting a date and saying, hey, make some good money. But if you can't find balance, then you got to set an off ramp and say, hey, by this date, by this age, I am moving over to this, because you will work like a Ranger platoon, Ranger company pace until you lose your family, without a doubt, in this world too. So like, don't chase the carrot, because there is good money to be made, especially if you come from a Ranger background. I'll tell you from guys, and I'm biased, of course, but we've hired a lot of every tiered organization, and the guys that lead everything are Rangers. And there's a reason for it. You're put in a leadership role at a really young age. You learn make a lot of mistakes. You're able to, you're not a 5IC at 15 years in the Army, so, again, different mission, different roles for everybody. But to me, as a hiring manager, hiring a Ranger is generally very low risk. He's going to perform, he's going to do the right thing when nobody's watching, he or she. So I think, with all that being said, I honestly believe like, you're going to come in and do all that you try to avoid doing in the first place. So it's like, set a metric and say, hey, I'm going to stick with it. Is it, I want to hit a certain amount where I can retire, and I want to hit a certain amount where I can make a lower paying job, or is it an age, whatever, different for everybody, but, or else you'll just go through the meat grinder with no, no finish line. And it takes a toll. Me and my wife had the conversation 1,000 times, and I'm sure you and your wife have, Clay, because I know you're both go-getters. And, Mike, I mean, I'm sure you're already starting to feel it as a, COO, but
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I mean, that's all, man, sage advice, and it's difficult. It's difficult to practice, because of just kind of our nature of doing things, and how we grow up and how we make a name for ourselves when we continue, to get put into positions of responsibility. And more specifically, we see problems, we solve them. Like that's just like ingrained into our nature and then reinforced, for 20 plus years. So it makes it difficult, but it's it's a difficult thing, especially when you have the opportunity, in terms of money, because it's not just about making money, so that you can live in the here and now, but also it's about, setting up your kids with better opportunities, better options and everything else, than you had, and I commonly say, like, I want to be the generational shift for my family. So,
Yeah.
well,
Tim and I get to talk that a lot. And well, if you get Tim, if you twist his arm to get on here, ask him about that, because he constantly, him and I go, his son just got drafted in the NFL, great kid, got a great family. And I share every, he can talk to my son better than I can. It's, how it goes, it's
Yeah.
like when I say it, it's the
Yeah, it's
dumbest
one
thing
of
in the
those
world,
things.
but when somebody else says it, it's smart. Um, but he constantly says, "Hey, Jesse, we're crippling these kids. We give them too much. They, because everybody, you can't hardly name even a Ranger that didn't come from hardship,
Yeah.
because you wouldn't have been you. So even when you make that point of setting them up for their lives, I try not to get too worried about that, because it's like, hey,
Well,
figure it out.
yeah,
We did.
I'm not, but what I'm talking about, like, no, Jesse, I don't disagree. Trust me, I make my kids like fucking suffer through a lot of shit. I'm talking about like when they've kind of started to figure stuff out in life, and they've had to overcome some things, and they've had to do things for themselves. Like, I want to be able to say, okay, hey, let's talk about money. Let's talk about like investments. Let me help you, investments, real estate, these different kind of things. Or, like my son, getting ready to join the, the Air Force. I know, boo, but he's getting ready to join the Air Force, and I'm super proud of him. He does 4 years, and he's just got an entrepreneur mindset. Okay, sell me on a business. Let's talk about business. What do you want to do? How can I help? And then going from there. No, I 100% agree with you. So my kids have never went to a private school. My kids, like I don't pay them for chores. I call it the price of admission. Like, hey, you live in, because my daughter literally looked at me like, why are you punishing me so much on the weekends with yard work? And I'm like, that's a price of admission. That's not a punishment. You want a punishment? I'll give you a punishment, but that's not punishment. Like, that's price of admission, especially because we live on land, so, but, and I know you get that. I hear the rooster in the background, but hey, Jess, man, we were beating down the door of, 2.5 hours, and we try to throw the limit at 2. Got one last question for you before I close this out. And it's our favorite question to ask here on Legends, although, there's been a lot of great conversation. But this is, from Jesse, talking to all Rangers, past, present, and future. Just imagine you could stand in front of all these individuals somehow. What would you say?
Well, the cliche answer of, weigh your bray kind of thing is always very true. But it's also, whether you have some good buddies that think you were a decent enough Ranger to get invited onto something like this, or you got, again, even with distinguished members of the regiment, let's not kid ourselves. To some degree, it's who knows you. If you were a quiet person, and you may not get asked, and so there's a zillion past, present, and eventually future Rangers that will not be part of these things, that have made some awesome contributions, way more than we ever will. And so I think of all this, the only thing that people remember is your reputation. And so regardless if everybody wants to race to be the, RCO, the RSM, the this, to take this job in front of this person. And, at the end of the day, like, we know that because we're the old guys now, but you look back and you're like, none of that mattered. It was all the Army needs people anyway. They're going to put you in a job, but I'm not saying don't give a shit, because you should, but like, you should strive for excellence and all that stuff, but it'll work out and everything happens for a reason. So I think, don't miss the moments because they go by quick. And I would say, make sure you can shave in the mirror, post Army, because, when your son or grandson or whoever's going through RASP and they're like, oh yeah, I remember your dad, he was a piece of shit. He fucking this and that, that's the thing about the Ranger Regiment. The guys I work with, some guys from, Bragg there, and they're like, man, I tell you one thing about the Ranger Regiment, man, it's a tight bunch, way more even than where we come from. And my one buddy is an old Marine that worked at the unit. And he's like, man, I've never seen such a tight organization like the Rangers. You guys all know each other. And man, I'll tell you, like, you pull no punches, you eat, regiments known to, eat their own. And they definitely do. That's good and bad. But so I'd say, the one thing you can control is your reputation. You may not have been the fastest, the best shooter, the whatever, and all that people forget about. But if you were a Ranger imposter, as Rick Merritt says, then everybody remembers that. So I think that's one thing that we can all control on our own. So, that's what I would leave folks with, because I hope that I left enough reputation to at least not be that piece of shit. I know there's 100 people that'll say it because you can't please everybody, but I tried not to be a piece of shit. So.
Well, we don't have a tendency to have pieces of shit on the podcast, so you're good. All right. Well, hey everyone, Jesse Navarro, thank you for coming on Legend of the 75th. I know everybody's gonna just absolutely love hearing from you. Talking about your time, talking about all the amazing things you did. Thank you for tuning in to the Legends of the 75th. Please share this episode so that we can make sure all of our Ranger buddies know about it. Let Rangers lead the way.